The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016. This is one of the very last chapters is titled Green Revolution. Just as America now faces an unsustainable thirst for energy, so too was Germany faced with a power crisis in the late 1990s. Growing demands for electricity collided with the reality that the country has no oil reserves and a strong bias among its people against building nuclear power plants in the wake of the nearby Chernobyl meltdown. Yet the government knew that the country needed the electricity, equivalent of at least 1 or 2 new nuclear power plants over the next decade. So how to generate that much electricity without nuclear power? In 1999, progressives in Germany passed the 100,000 Roofs program, which mandated the banks had to provide low-interest 10-year loans to homeowners sufficient for them to put solar panels on their roofs. They then passed the Renewable Energy Law and integrated the 100,000 Roofs program into it in 2004. The Renewable Energy Law, REL, mandated that for the next 10 years, the power company had to buy power back from those homeowners at a level substantially above the going rate so that the homeowners' income from the solar panels would equal their loan payments on the panels and would also represent the actual cost to the power company to generate that amount of power by building a new nuclear power plant. At the end of the 10 years, the power company gets to buy solar power at its regular rate, and it now has a new source of power without having to pay and maintain and eventually dismantle a nuclear reactor. In fact, while the reactor would have a 20 to 30-year lifespan, the solar panels typically last 50 years. For the homeowners, it was a no-brainer. They were getting low-interest loans from banks for the solar panels, and the power companies were paying for the power generated from those panels at a higher rate, high enough to pay off the loans. It was like getting solar power panels for free. If anything, the government underestimated how rapidly Germans would embrace the program, and thus how quickly power would be produced by the program. By 2007, Germany accounted for about half the entire world's solar market. Just that one year, 2007, saw 1,300 megawatts, and a megawatt is 1,000,000 watts, 1,300 megawatts of solar generating capacity brought online just across Germany. For comparison, consider the average generating capacity of each of the last 5 nuclear power plants brought online in the United States. That capacity is 1,100 megawatts. So Germany had 1,300 megawatts just in 2007 added. In 2008, Germany added 2,000 megawatts of solar power to their grid, like 2 nukes. And in 2009, homeowners and businesses put onto their roofs enough solar panels to glean an additional 2,500 megawatts. Although the goal for the first decade of this century was to generate around 3,000 megawatts, eliminating the need to build 2 new nuclear power plants, the simple no-risk program had instead added over 8,000 megawatts of power, roughly 8 nuclear power plants. And because the generation sources were scattered across the country, there was no need to run new high-tension power lines from central generating stations, making it more efficient and less expensive. Meanwhile, as dozens of German companies got into the business of manufacturing and installing solar power systems, the cost dropped by more than half between 1997 and 2007 and continues to plummet. The Germans expect that by 2050, more than a quarter of all their electricity will come from solar. It's now just over 1%. Now, I wrote this book 2.5 years ago. Germany this summer produced 100% of their electricity this way. That's how rapidly this has changed just in the last 3 years. It's really remarkable. Adding to the roughly 12.5% of all German energy currently produced by renewable sources, mostly hydro, but also wind, biomass, and geothermal. The solar panel program has been so successful that the German government is now thinking that it's time to back off and leave this to the marketplace, which they've largely done. And it's not just leaving it to the marketplace. They had to reinvent their grid. There's to be a smart grid to handle all the added electricity that all these solar panels were producing. They have too much electricity now in Germany. Germany is now considering incentives to its world-famous domestic auto industry to manufacture flex-fuel plug-in hybrid automobiles that can get over 500 miles per gallon of strategic gasoline, boosted by domestically produced rooftop solar with existing technology. Meanwhile, Denmark has invested billions in having more than half of its entire auto fleet using only electricity by 2030. And China is no slouch when it comes to renewable energy. Although the Chinese continue to bring another dirty coal-fired power plant online about once a week, they surpassed every other nation in the world in 2010 in direct investment in the production of solar and wind power. As the Los Angeles Times reported in March of 2010, U.S. clean energy investments hit $18 billion last year. A report from the Pew Charitable Trust said a little more than half the Chinese total of $34 billion. 5 years ago, Chinese investments in clean energy totaled just $2.5 billion. The United States also slipped behind 10 other countries, including Canada and Mexico, in clean energy investments as a share of the national economy. The Pew report pointed to another factor constraining U.S. competitiveness: a lack of national mandates for renewable energy production or a surcharge on greenhouse gas emissions that would make fossil fuels more expensive. The ultimate power to the people is for homes to have their own solar roofs, no longer needing power lines from distant power plants owned by big transnational corporations. And a few countries are pushing this solar tipping point, like China and Germany. Book The Crash of 2016.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in freedom and the American way. Thom Hartmann here.
Say what?
Oh, fix my microphone. Hang on just a second here. Mute it.
Okay. Now do I sound better? Indeed. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, my microphone had fallen off. All righty. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us on the line today. It's our Middays with Mark hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925, whatever you would like to talk with Congressman Pocan about. He is, of course, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. Website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, as in representative, Rep Mark, M-A-R-K, Pocan, P-O-C-A-N. And Congressman Pocan, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
Great to have you with us. So, it is, Congress is out, so it's officially town hall time. How's that going for the Republicans, and how's that going for you?
I'll tell you, the Republicans are doing their best to avoid interacting with their constituents this month, and we're seeing with a few instances where they've had town halls, we're watching amazing reactions from people, right? I mean, they're really taking them to task on a multitude of subjects, but I think healthcare still being, in the forefront. But, this is what our jobs are, right? You have town halls, you talk to people whether they agree with you or not. You don't just have private town halls or telephone town halls where you screen the questions or anything else. You actually got to meet with your constituents. And, today I'm calling you from Beloit, Wisconsin, at the southern tip of my district in Rock County, a county I happen to split with Paul Ryan. And Paul now has gone over 674 days now without a public town hall, and they're starting to put billboards up. They're really starting to put some pressure on him locally, just, grassroots grown, because he won't have a conversation with his constituents. So I think we're seeing a lot of that around the country right now.
That's remarkable. And also, I just unlocked our phone lines, by the way. If people want to call in, I'm sorry, they had been locked out. So the number is 202-808-9925. Yesterday, the president, Donald Trump, dropped a bombshell on us and the world. I have no specific recollection other than Harry Truman, after he had already dropped the first nuclear bomb on Japan, even making a reference
to nuclear annihilation. And certainly that, that was a threat, but it was a threat that he not only was prepared to follow through on, but about 4 days later, he dropped the second bomb. I was just blown away by this. I'm curious, A, your response, and B, that of your colleagues.
I have said dozens and dozens of times when people ask me about Donald Trump, I'll say, in a lot of ways we have checks and balances in the system, and generally it's the stuff he says and puts out there that's not going to happen versus the stuff I worry about. Sometimes he just decrees something by tweet and it gets out there. This is the one exception. I've always said my biggest worry is that at 4 a.m. he gets up and he sends out some tweet that sets off Kim Jong-un because it's a little hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And what he did in those comments, as you said, were so unbelievably belligerent, ignorant. I can't even express enough words to describe how dangerous what he did was. And then when you have to have his Secretary of State and his ambassador to the UN all trying to reel back the comments, you can't have the commander-in-chief without the respect of anyone in the country or even the people he works with to say something as wrong and idiotic as he did. And, the fact that I just can't help to understand that as his polls drop to 33%, I think I heard one was 32% today, that when you start seeing these actions, we've seen this movie trailer before. I am hoping that he is not, doing something incredibly stupid for his own self, rather than addressing the way we need to address this, which is obviously, our partners in the Chinese have to be the major players in trying to make sure we get North Korea to do something right. And let's face it, the UN just voted that way, right? We're moving things forward in the right way. What he did was absolutely irresponsible for anyone who's in the White House, and I honestly think this may be the worst thing yet I've seen out of this administration.
Isn't it ironic that America First was the slogan of the Lindbergh crowd in the late 30s, early 40s, who did not want us to go to war against World War II, and now his America First could be the thing that starts World War III? I just, maybe I'm being hyperbolic, but it just shocks me.
Well, I not only listened to his words and I watched the video, but he almost looked down as if he was trying to read something that he must have jotted down about this and how he said it, and he even screwed it up the second time, which we've come to expect. But it was those are you can't say those kind of words unless you're really, really serious, or you diminish the military in this country. And then by tweeting this morning saying that he's already improved the nuclear arsenal, that's an outright lie. I've been listening to general after general this morning say, well, that's not actually true. And when he diminishes our credibility as a country, especially with someone as unstable as Kim Jong-un has been as a leader, this just puts our entire nation and everyone who very honorably works to defend this country in the military at risk. And it's just the opposite of what a president is supposed to be about. And again, I think this one is really, for me, the rock bottom I've seen yet out of Donald Trump.
Now, the spin machine over at Fox News is processing, and on right-wing hate radio is processing this as, oh, finally, we've got a president who will talk tough to dictators. Diplomacy hasn't worked for 8, 10, 12 years. It's time to take names and kick ass. And that's what that's what Trump is doing, and we should all be proud of him. What do you think?
Yeah, promising to drop nukes is not in that category. I mean, this should be the rock bottom then for Fox and those people too trying to spin this, because at some point, this is Paul Ryan too. I mean, one other thing I think is important, if I can just add, Tom, is when we got a bipartisan vote in the Appropriations Committee for Barbara Lee's proposal to reauthorize, give a new authorization for war, the new AUMF, and Paul Ryan single-handedly took it out of the bill that proceeded to the floor. Paul Ryan is also complicit, because if you give the keys to the nuclear arsenal to someone who appears to not be stable on multiple levels, like Donald Trump is proving more and more to be, and especially with his comments, then someone like Paul Ryan, who's supposed to be an adult, shows that he's part of the problem. And we have to make sure Congress takes another look at that AUMF reauthorization.
Yeah. I'd like to see an actual declaration of war if we're going to be using military forces.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is just, this incrementalism that we've had going on well, arguably since the 50s, in a big way since Vietnam. You'd think we would have learned our lesson. Anyhow, we'll pick up your phone calls in just a moment here. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. It's our Middays with Mark segment. He'll be taking your calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan for the hour right after this. And welcome back. Congressman Pocan, you're still with us?
I am.
Okay, let's see here. Let me get a tune-in radio. Here we go. Rob in Arizona. Hey, Rob, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, thank you. Hey, Congressman Pocan, I've got an idea. Since the Republicans are fighting, illegal voting, which doesn't exist, we should combat fake news. And one idea I had to do that is maybe have the FCC come up with the Truth in News and Information Doctrine. And this would be completely voluntary for all news and, information outlets to subscribe to. And it's basically an emblem they would put on the beginning of their show to say that they comply with the Truth and Information Doctrine, which is nothing more than just good journalism defined. And basically, if they violate that, they could be fined for, violating the doctrine. And anyone who uses that emblem who is not part of the membership could also be fined. And it's just a way of combating fake news.
I think already, part of the journalism ethics and standards we have should do some of that. I totally understand what you're saying. I guess my fear would be anyone in this that has any connection to this administration or any oversight in this administration putting a definition of news could be a little bit dangerous. But we've got to. I'm a journalism major, right? I mean, I respect the profession, and when I watch what Donald Trump is doing, I mean, this is all so Orwellian, right? Trying to rewrite basic concepts of how we think, and he's still got 32% right now people thinking what he's saying is correct, although it's diminishing on a regular basis. But I totally agree that there should be some way that we can try to put this out there. I think the one thing I'd say is every time I've seen an attack like this in the past, whether it be against the LGBT community or immigrants or anyone else, they go too far and we wind up winning in the end, that people will understand the definition and the value of journalism and what it provides society and why you need that fourth estate to be there for us. And I think that we need to figure something out. And I like the thought that you're at least trying to come up with an idea. I just don't know if I want government touching it.
Yeah, this is one of those areas where, the whole conservative hysteria about government actually, we need to have a conversation about this in the context of an understanding of civics, that, yeah, government does have the power to imprison people, has the power to kill people, and that's a very, very substantial power that needs to be taken very seriously. And before you apply that power, you make sure that it's absolutely necessary. And yeah, if I was being defined, if I was being told what I had to say based on whichever administration was in power, I'd have some real problems with that, Congressman.
Right.
So,
but I appreciate that Rob is trying to think how we get to this issue, right? Because we don't want generations to suddenly, hearing this, that they're doing this Orwellian reworking what news is.
It seems like just bringing competition back, just breaking up the giant media monopolies might be a starting point.
Absolutely, and you and I have had this conversation so many times, Tom, about what the corporate media covers and what they don't, and often it's either based on the parent company ownership or what best delivers in 22 minutes of news a sale of a new bottle of detergent, and it's not necessarily getting the facts or information out, and we're struggling into that on a regular basis.
Yeah, it absolutely is. We're hitting break here. We'll be back with more of Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls in Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. It is coming up on 18 minutes past.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan on the line, taking your calls. And let's see here. Jill in Princeton, Minnesota. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. How are you?
I am good, Jill. Thank you.
On the lighter side, you spoke at our third annual Democracy Convention held at the University of Minnesota, and thank you for that. That was awesome. And I'm wondering what your take is on how what we're doing at our Democracy Convention, how it relates to the wars that are continuing and the fears that people have. And I don't want to take up time. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on what we're doing at our third annual Democracy Convention.
Well, I think, whether it be the Democracy Convention this past week and weekend in Minnesota, Netroots Nation this week in Atlanta, whenever we have these convening of people who are trying to help, on public policy, this is exactly how we will ultimately win, is with people power, right? We know that the public in general agrees with us on the issues. It's just that often money and things distort on the far right. But we have the people power, and right now people are engaged, and we saw the engagement both at the conference in Minnesota, and I think we'll see it again this week at Netroots Nation. The more we can get people reaching out to their elected officials, joining with organizations to amplify their voices, to fight the bad things that are happening at this time, and getting ready for the next set of elections, because now we all know elections have consequences without a doubt. Nothing more than looking at the last 24 hours and the madness that this president's put out there around North Korea and the really dangerous behavior says why we all have to be active. So every time we get together with other folks, I think it's energizing. It helps us share ideas and helps us to make sure that we can get other people also engaged, and that's ultimately how we win.
John in Janesville, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you both for what you do. Congressman Pocan, question, as far as the fairness doctrine goes, where we're getting killed and there's only 9 or 10 stations that talk about things that we want to do in this country today, when Ronald Reagan did away with that back in his tenure, was that a law or did he sign it out with executive privilege? Executive order. You remember?
That's Tom. I think I might ask you that question.
Sure.
I'm not sure the history of it.
It was the Federal Communications Commission. The Fairness Doctrine said it was part of the FCC code. Part of the rules that the FCC promulgated in response to the Telecommunications Act. So it wasn't written by Congress. It was written by the FCC. So Reagan was able to direct the FCC to simply stop enforcing their own regulation. And then 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, President Obama ordered the FCC to actually physically remove it from the books. But it did not mandate that if I do a show on a particular network that Rush Limbaugh has to do the next show. It wasn't that. It was about speech by the station itself, which Sinclair Broadcasting does, that if you did an editorial on behalf of the station, you had to offer the other point of view, number one. Number two, you had to give a certain amount of free time to political candidates and talk about the issues of the day. And number three, you had to program in the public interest, which this all fell into that rubric. And the largest, 99%, 95% of that was providing actual news, which is why all the news networks lost money on their news feed, because that was the cost of keeping a radio or TV license. So.
And I think to John's point is, I think it would be great if we had the fairness doctrine back, right? It's
I agree.
To have that protection in place. And the second thing is, and I'm glad to see the Democrats made this part of their new better deal proposal about talking about better jobs and better wages and a better future, is antitrust law. Just the fact that we're watching Sinclair about to do a consolidation that's going to hit over 70% of the country, a company that's had a political bias to present media, that's a problem. And, it's part of our antitrust laws that quite honestly go back to Bill Clinton, but we see it in a number of areas. I'm glad to see that Democrats are raising issues like that, looking at 2018, because it really is affecting consumers and the American people.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. David in Columbus, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I appreciate your efforts in participating in this. The only chance I get to understand a true Democratic response to the Republicans is your comments. And since you sit in on all the meetings, unfortunately, the Democrats have seemed to go along with a lot of these wars, which are completely insane and been carried on for a long, long time, all the way back to the Truman administration. What do you feel the Democratic response is? I know what Keith Ellison feels. I know what you feel. But what is the overall Democratic response to all this warmongering?
Well, I'll tell you, David, it's a great question, and I think, I've been looking. Let me, if I can, just read. I don't want to do it long. I'm going to read a sentence or two or a word or two out of Nancy Pelosi's statement. She called it recklessly belligerent, a grave lack of appreciation for the severity of the North Korean nuclear situation. I mean, I think if you follow, especially social media today, because we now have that in place, you can see I'm watching across the board, across somewhat the spectrum within the Democratic Party concern about what's happening, especially around North Korea. So while, I think one of the things we've always had to challenge, and you find it often with votes in Congress, is that people have a lot of the military operations in their district, and that sometimes affects how people vote on things. In general, especially with a president like this, I see more and more that's why we had a almost unanimous vote on the Appropriations Committee to have a new reauthorization, because I think there's concern that we're not doing the checks and balances the Constitution says, which is getting Congress involved when that comes, because we're the closest to the people. So,
well, Paul Ryan blew that up, didn't he?
Well, he did, and I think this is where, I just put a tweet out today. We're trying to put pressure back on him again. I mean, Paul Ryan needs to start standing up for the country, and I would say political party, but I don't even think he's standing up for his political party right now. He's just rolling over and letting the president rub his belly whenever the president needs to, and that's quite honestly not the behavior of the Speaker of the House of Representatives. He's supposed to be the Speaker for me and for the American people as well, because he's got that job, and instead he might as well go directly on the payroll of this White House with all the other wackiness they're doing, because he's defied any logic in standing up as a separate branch of government. So
I wonder,
we need him to stand up.
I wonder if he's thinking Trump is going to get impeached, Pence will become president, and I'll become vice president, so I need to be nice to these guys. Who knows?
The way he's going, he's just going to be a nice lapdog.
I think you're right.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's 27 and a half minutes past the hour. We're talking with Congressman Mark Pocan. It's our Middays with Mark segment. He's taking your calls for the hour. Back with more right after this.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Bob Ney's book, Sideswiped, Lessons Learned Courtesy of the Hitmen of Capitol Hill. Bob was the only member of Congress. He was a Republican congressman. In fact, he was the guy who invented the phrase freedom fries. That far right, yes. He was the only member of Congress who spoke Farsi, which is the language they speak in Iran. The Iranian government, during the Bush administration, George W. Bush, sent a letter to, or delivered a letter to Bob in Farsi, because he spoke Farsi, saying that they were willing to recognize Israel and stop their nuclear program in exchange for recognition by the United States. Bob delivered that to the Bush White House, and within a short time, Bob found himself in a federal prison. And that letter never surfaced, and that rapprochement never happened. It's an amazing story. It's too long to read as an excerpt, but it's in the book. And, you know, that was the end of Bob's political career. Now he's working for Talk Media News. But this is from chapter 17 of his book. It's titled Political Strong-Arming. I had a major blowout over the Head Start program with Andy Card, President George W. Bush's chief of staff. The first of the legislation debates centered on Head Start. John Boehner was doing his best to acquire votes to hurt the program. I had supported Head Start for years as an Ohio State senator and again as a U.S. congressman. When George Bush became president, however, every issue, including this one, was treated as though, if lost, it would be the end of the world, as if winning were vital to save the presidency. Speaker Hastert became a lapdog for President Bush. Didn't matter whether it was overspending, crushing unions, ripping the legs out from under Head Start. Hastert acted like the president ran the House instead of the other way around. I found myself under intense pressure to vote against Head Start. I was bombarded by all sides, Tom DeLay, Hastert's staff, and the chairman of the Education Committee, which at the time was John Boehner. I found it amazing that a sitting president would make a do-or-die issue over taking money away from poor children who needed a jump on school, a Head Start. Anyone in the field of education knew that Head Start had a rocky beginning, but it had proven to be statistically and socially a very fine program, and I had always supported it. I had a private hideaway, an office the Speaker gives to leaders and long-term older members of Congress that very few people knew about. Even Brian Walsh, my press secretary, was unaware. On this particular evening, I was in that Capitol hideaway, one floor directly below the chamber. I was sick and tired of being lobbied and bullied on this vote. I had to escape the arm twisting. I used to say it was so bad that you could hear the bones snap on the floor of the House. My private phone in the hideaway was ringing, so I knew that only Ted Vander Meade of the Speaker's office could have given it out. Chris Kruger, my executive assistant, answered it and signaled me that it was Andy Card, the White House chief of staff. Andy said, "We need this Head Start vote. It's critical to the Bush administration's future." I was stunned at this. The entire future of the Bush administration was predicated on beating up on little unfortunate kids by taking away their Head Start funding. I thought this was idiocy and stupid politics. I said, I have always supported Head Start over my entire career. I don't like this vote, and I just cannot help you. Card blew up at me and responded with, "Let me make this clear. Boehner said you were a vote for us, and we are holding you to that." I don't know where Boehner got that from, I said. I can rethink this, but I don't like it, and I'm sure I will not change my mind. Andy then said, "You are an effing liar," only he spells out the word. And I said, "F you, Andy, and your idiotic administration." And I hung up on him. I went to the floor of the House where Boehner confronted me. I told him, Andy is disrespectful, way out in left field on this. He can kiss my ass and F him, period. Boehner continued to strong-arm me. They were one vote short. It boiled down to the fact that this vote was so hideous, so wrong, that they simply could not get the votes. One of my best friends in Congress, Steve LaTourette, took a bullet for me on this to move the bill along. He told him to back off on me and he would help through the process in the House, but not necessarily if or when the vote came back from the Senate. The second time Andy Card ran afoul of Congress, he had to confront Congressman Steve LaTourette. Steve was one of the finest members of Congress, very brave in his positions, an independent thinker, good at politics, and no wallflower. He's conservative on some issues, but he cares deep down about working people and how they survive in America. At this writing, Steve has left Congress, frustrated with the lack of acceptance of moderates within the Republican Party. Andy Card decided that he wanted to remove Davis-Bacon, a federal law that requires payment of prevailing wages to workers on public works projects, from the Transportation Appropriation Bill. Don Young was a strong transportation chairman and let LaTourette take the lead on the issue. I dug into Andy's history and found some interesting things. He'd been a Massachusetts state rep. He'd worked for President Bush's father, Bush 41. When Bush 41 lost to Clinton, Andy felt that the transportation bill had done the president no good, and he disliked labor unions, and he disliked unions in general. We all kept up a tough front. Transportation unions lobbyist for the building trades, like Tim James, was very effective and helped the labor Republicans push back. Bush 43, though, kept putting up roadblocks at every step. He simply did not want a transportation bill that might support the unions. John Mica, Transportation Subcommittee Chair, during a private Republican caucus meeting, made the best statement of the day. John said, "Hell, the president doesn't think we need a bill. As he travels in cities by car, they stop all the traffic for his motorcade. He thinks there are no traffic problems. The streets are deserted." We all howled. So anyhow, there's just all these amazing inside stories about how Congress actually works. It's pretty grim. The book Sideswiped by Bob Ney.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And getting back on the line here. Congressman Pocan, you're still with us?
I am.
And great. Okay, let's pick up some phone calls here. Terrell in Texas. You're on the air with... no, I'm sorry. I've got different call screening software here than normal. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. You're the one who's on the... No? Wait a second. Yeah, it's Norma. Okay. I'm having a hard time reading my own software. Norma, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello?
Oh, no, it is Terrell. Hey, Terrell in Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah. How you doing?
Good.
I appreciate y'all taking my call, Congressman Pocan and Mr. Hartman. Well, my question is, I was a diehard Democrat. This year right here just basically made me want to go more independent, because what I'm wondering is, how come Congress and Democrats right now aren't really trying to force the issue of single-payer health care so that we can have some sort of basis to stand behind them? Most of the country is trying to become single-payer and everything, and if I figure that if Democrats really force the issue, there'll be more Democrats elected for this next term.
Yeah, so Terrell, first of all, I agree. I mean, when I go around and do town halls, the number one issue that comes up as we talk about health care, the number one issue of any town hall these days, when we get to single payer or Medicare for all, gets the single best response. So I completely agree with you. But the only thing I'd say a little different is I do see Democrats talking about this, and we have a record number of sponsors on John Conyers' bill, Medicare for All, House Resolution 676. 116 people. So 116 people out of the 186 or so House Democrats are currently sponsors, the top level we've ever had. So I think that's encouraging and promising. But I also realize that with a Republican House and a Republican Senate and a Republican President, it's not going to happen. So that does move us to 2018 and talking about that conversation. So I hear people like Randy Bryce, who's running against Paul Ryan in Wisconsin's 1st District, making this a major issue that he's talking about. And I'm seeing it in other congressional districts around the country. So the good news is 116 Democrats are in support of that bill, which is a record number. And the good thing is I think we're seeing people talk about it when they're running against Republican incumbents. So let's keep the pressure up. This is one where, I've said this, I don't like to quote bumper stickers, but if the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. We just need to keep being vocal about this and asking for what we want, as opposed to people telling us what we need in healthcare.
Amen. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
And, hey, Dr. Tom, is this me?
That's you?
Okay.
Finally. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I also, am for single payer, and I wish they'd at least put that in as an option in a bill. But no, the reason I call is this Trump TV thing is what I'm calling it. We already have perception management run by major corporations. You see the same thing on so many stations. And this reminds me of the brainwashing that was the basis of the book Fahrenheit 451. I don't think anybody reads anymore, and that's part of the problem. But if they don't understand that they are essentially being programmed that you'll think this way, you'll believe this way, taking away freedom of speech from us, taking away the First Amendment, it's going to be a lot easier. People are just going to go ahead and agree, and then when they try to pull this Constitution Convention stuff and deny us the right to elect senators, or the right to protest, or the right to vote, I don't know what is going to happen in this country, because I don't think that people are going to put up with it. What makes these people think that they can turn us into 451?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. So what I look at is, they look at the last election, and not trying to re-debate the merits of it, but when we were down 200,000 Democratic voters in Wisconsin, it had consequences. Russ Feingold, who is, I think, one of the finest U.S. senators we had in the country, who during 2010 got kicked out like so many did across the country, was running again, wasn't down in a single poll, but because we had a depressed turnout, partially because of things like photo ID laws, partially because of a somewhat uninspired presidential campaign in Wisconsin with no visits by the candidate, we wound up losing, and Ron Johnson got reelected. And Tom, I don't know if you saw, but Ron Johnson this morning, one of the more disgusting things I've seen come out of a U.S. senator, said that the reason John McCain voted the way he did on health care might have been because of his brain tumor.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so I've twice now tweeted out for him to apologize. This is absolutely ridiculous. But, they're so good at making sure their base comes out no matter what. But they do all sorts of things to make it so we don't get voters out, and then they can kind of tweak the elections. They either do it through votes or through gerrymandering by, picking who your voters are as opposed to the voters picking their elected officials. We just have to push back on those efforts wherever we see them so that they can't do those things. So I'm just hoping that we keep this activism up. We have to keep engaging people. We have to have record turnouts in 2018. And with record turnouts, you're going to be able to change a lot of faces of those who are in Congress and make them represent you, as well as our state legislatures and our municipal governments. We just have to keep as vigilant as possible. We're seeing this really damaging effect of what's happening, and we've got to stop it really quickly.
Chris in Littleton, Colorado. You're on with Congressman Pocan.
Representative, it looks like here in Colorado, Ed Perlmutter, I guess isn't going to be running for the House, but I really hope that he runs for Senate. But, I mean, if he leaves the state, that's going to be a huge loss for us down here.
Yeah, Ed's a great colleague, and I know he was thinking about governor, and now he's decided not to do that. I'm not sure if we've got 100% definitive if he's not running for re-election again as a member of Congress. I know at one point he said he wasn't, but I know a lot of members have talked to him about it. But, we're going to be focusing, though, on the districts, too, that we've got to pick up around the country. And, we know that I think there's 23 districts that Hillary Clinton won that have Republicans. We know there's a number of other swing districts out there, and we saw the big shifts in the special elections this year in deep red districts that narrowed down to barely red districts. If you start having that kind of a swing in districts that are 5% Republican or 7% Republican, that's obliterated that amount. So I think the last I heard is something like 208 districts that have Republicans already have an announced Democrat running, and about 10% of that is what Republicans have running against Democrats. There is an enthusiasm out there. We're going to have a lot of primaries. I think we have to be careful not to, how we treat each other through those primaries, but we have got some real opportunities to make sure that we're taking back the House of Representatives in 2018.
Caesar in Chicago. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having such informative program. My question has to deal, especially here in Chicago, one of the facts that I always see and read is thing that's really worrying me right now is the Foxconn deal, for example. It reminds me, I'm from Guatemala, so it reminds me a lot of the deals that happen in countries like Guatemala. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, especially with the land grants, the tax breaks that you're giving them, what that's going to mean politically, socially, and economically for the state, not only your state, but also here in Illinois?
Yeah, and Caesar, let me even take it a little broader. We see these around the country. When people do these incentives, it's the low road economics, right? Not the high road. We'll offer incentives for someone to come across a state line to steal from another state or something, and you wind up offering so much of an incentive that you'll never get the tax return. There was one on the border of Wisconsin and Minnesota where a Dairy Queen got about $250,000 in incentives, and they created 2 part-time jobs out of it. That's not a good deal for taxpayers. So with Foxconn, I think a couple things are important to mention. One is I think a lot of what they're doing is looking at if President Trump really is going to do the tariffs he's talking about, which I don't think will ever become a reality because the Republicans in Congress won't ever allow that. They're trying to be ready to make sure that they've got a presence here if they need to. Now, they've told Pennsylvania to build a plant. They never did. They told Indonesia they're going to build a plant. They never did. And I think there's a third one somewhere that they promised and never done. So first of all, you've got to be careful how you give incentives to something that may never happen. Second, I keep hearing the company saying it's going to be 3,000 jobs. Scott Walker, who's desperate for re-election in 2018, keeps saying 13,000
Well, isn't he including the construction jobs to build the factory?
That's separate. What he's doing is they said aspirationally they'd like to have 13,000. Tom, in your business, aspirationally, you'd love to have a staff of 100, right?
Oh, yeah. And someday we may. Who knows?
Right. But, maybe not in the next year or two, and here Foxconn. So what he's doing is saying that $13,000 number with the $3 billion of incentives to try to lower the per job number, and then they're claiming it's going to be $55,000 a year job wages for those jobs. But right now they're paying a little over $17 a day in Asia. Again, a lot doesn't pass the upper Midwest smell test. So I want to make sure, as I talk to my friends in the legislature, and I have extensively in the last 2 weeks, that any incentives, if they're going to be offered, they should be tied to the actual number of jobs, the pay of jobs, as they're looking forward. Because otherwise, you start doing this, I think it's like 40-some years before we get our money back in offering this kind of an incentive. And, companies, of course, are going to go around and fish and play state to state to state to do this kind of stuff. This is a low road to economics. It's a good thing if you have 13,000 new jobs, but I'm not sure there are going to be that.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. Congressman, back some years ago, this is probably 5-6 years ago, Bernie was doing one of his segments like this with us, and somebody called in about this topic, and he offered what I thought was the most common sense solution I've ever heard, and I'm wondering if it ever got any traction and if any of your colleagues. He suggested that any states that participate in interstate competition for a corporation moving within the United States. This was back when Boeing was playing states against each other. Who's going to give us the best deal if we move our headquarters out of Seattle? He suggested that any state that participates should lose their federal highway matching funds for at least a year or two. What do you think?
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, one of the things we used to try to do, we had a group called, it was the worst name, MPN, but it was the Midwest Progressive Elected Officials Network, state legislators in the upper Midwest. And we tried to stop this by saying, let's all commit to having a high road to economics. Let's not allow this to happen. And we started doing proposals like, if a company doesn't create the jobs they said they're going to, which is rarely, by the way, Tom, ever checked after the fact to see if they created what they said, that they have to give back money. Or if they leave within a certain amount of time, they have to give back money. We try to put some reasonable standards out there so that suddenly that company may not just grab all the money because they may have to pay some of it back. Right now, it's often a blank check with everyone going for the press release, and you just spent $3 billion for a press release that you created 13,000 jobs, when in reality you may get a far smaller number of jobs, if any, at a much greater cost.
Yeah. Amen. Let's see here. Thomas in Seymour, Illinois, watching Free Speech TV on the Dish Network. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Okay, good morning. I was wondering, does Congress have oversight over the Supreme Court in our, whether or not they can, they could undo Citizens United?
If I may read from Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, and then you can go off on it, Congressman.
Sure.
Article 3, Section 2 says, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. And yes, there has been legislation that specifically has said, within the legislation, the Supreme Court may not rule on this. To you, sir.
And specifically to Citizens United, I mean, there are several constitutional amendments that would address it. While there are several, the one that I personally think is the most effective is the one that Move to Amend nationally has been advocating for, which is pretty simple. It says money is not speech and corporations are not people. Not only do you get rid of the fundraising, anonymous money parts of End Citizens United, but you start to say a corporation is not a person in other parts of the law, which is also necessary.
Yeah, and which is, reversing the head note that John Chandler Bancroft Davis wrote into the 1886 Santa Clara County decision. Even though the decision went opposite of the head note, the Supreme Court has been quoting the head note for the last 150 years. It's absolutely crazy, this whole idea of corporate personhood.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we just have 10 seconds here. We're going to hit a break, but
if anybody is interested, I wrote a book about this called Unequal Protection. I'm not trying to sell the book. You can read it for free online, the entire book, over at truthout.org. And it's about, the 14th Amendment, how corporations became people. Starts actually with the founding of the Republic, goes through 1886, goes through the Citizens United case, Buckley, all that stuff. So anyhow, we'll be back with Congressman Mark Hogan. Welcome back. Let's see here. CJ in Titusville, Florida. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Congressman, how are you?
Hey, good, CJ. Thank you.
Good.
I understand the taxpayers have pumped about $1 trillion into strategic defense initiative, missile defense. I never hear anything about that as being really the solution to this Korea thing. Do you think that might be just another MIC boondoggle?
Well, I'll tell you, let me say this, I think, because I didn't say this earlier, and I want to make sure I get it out. The Progressive Caucus, we have been urging for a long time, including President Obama, to commit to a no first use policy for nuclear weapons. And so, we've done this with both Democrat and Republican administrations. And, we just want to make sure that these are not used, especially as seemingly unthinkingly as President Trump has been talking about, right? I mean, the fact that he just says this so cavalier, and as you contrasted, Tom, with what President Truman and how he said it and when he said it versus saying it now and then watching his whole administration trying to put the words back out of the public airways, this is what's dangerous. So, a big part of it is I wish we had fewer nukes, period, across the world. I wish we'd invest more to bring in some of those old nukes and we go back to nuclear-free zones here in Wisconsin back in the early 80s. I remember working on, but I think that just having a commitment to a no first-use policy and other ideas that we've tried to put out there would be far better for us overall. And getting that new debate on an authorization is absolutely critical.
Tracy in Fredericksburg, Maryland. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Tracy? No, Tracy. Okay, let's try Martha in Dwight, North Dakota. Martha, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. But I got one question for the congressman. I'm here in North Dakota, and we're getting our butts kicked by law enforcement and stuff here. And I'm wondering where the representatives and any people like that are.
Marcia, what do you mean by getting our butts kicked by law enforcement?
Well, the dogs attacking us and the water cannons and all of that.
Are you part of a Native American community there?
No, I'm just a state member. And I'm wondering, how come we don't have any representatives out there helping us with our protests, with all of the things that we're fighting against?
This is with regard to Dakota Access Pipeline?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And health care, all of the things that we're out protesting. I don't see a lot of congressmen helping.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
Congressman
so I know that there have been a number of letters and I believe press conferences and other statements with members around that issue and other issues around it. So I know there's been activity. I think, what we often point back to is if the corporate media doesn't report it, did it happen? If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to listen, did it, make a sound? This is often what happens. So members have advocated. I think the tough part is, we all have a tough travel schedule. Last week I was in New Jersey and Minnesota. This week I'm in Georgia. Next week I'm in Nevada. Following week I'm in Tennessee. That's in between trying to represent my district and do my job here. So, I know there are some members who've made more awareness than others on this, and I think you should try to invite folks to come to your area, but realize that, our first responsibility is to our districts. We're in Washington a lot of time, other than August happens to be this period where we're home. But as I just gave you part of my travel schedule, we're all trying to advocate on behalf of a lot of things, but this is one where I know activity has happened in Washington.
Jim in Lombard, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. Hi, Tom. I just had a thing I wanted to say. This is what I say. I think Republicans have been blinded by right-wing propaganda and money. And what we have is the blind leading the blind. There are physically blind people who have better mental vision than these Republicans do. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, there's no question that so much of this comes to what their donors and their corporate masters via their donations do for their campaigns, or why the decisions they make the decisions. You know, there are some things that are core principles, I guess, that make someone a Republican, or especially these days the Tea Party. You know, there's some interesting core principles, although largely around racism and xenophobia. But there's no question that money distorts things so much in politics, which is why, whether it be Citizens United or a variety of other measures that we talk about, you've got to adjust and address them. Otherwise, why would we allow pharmaceutical companies to continue to price gouge and do the activities they do? Why would we allow oil companies to still get subsidies despite record profits? I go down the list. There's a whole lot of bad decisions that happen because of their ability to influence campaigns with money, and you're right on that, Jim.
Mark in Chico, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. Hey, you know, why they speak of Russia 24/7 and Korea, a lot of regulations are being discarded, and a lot of those we aren't going to get back. And, you know, I think it's really time for people to start speaking up about the regulations that Trump and his cohorts are getting rid of. So I wish he would talk about that.
Yeah, so let me say a couple things. I mean, one, I think, you know, we are definitely trying to point out this rollback of regulations often means protections for things like clean air and clean water and worker safety and a whole lot of things that the vast majority of people support. But when you just give it a generic name, like it's a, you know, burdensome regulation that's stopping job creation, which is usually the specter they raise, there's a whole lot more to often what they're trying to roll back. And you know, we see this in nearly every single area, and this is something that I would argue that President Trump has been mildly successful on, because a lot of this is regulated by the agencies that he himself has appointed. So we need to keep speaking out on these, right, and keep making sure that people realize that what may be called in the vernacular, you know, just another regulation is really protecting your water and your air, and, you know, the fact that you can go home at the end of a day and not be injured or dead.
And shouldn't we add to that protecting us from corporations who are willing to harm us in the name of profits?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and I think what we need to do, I'm a big believer of storytelling, and I think we have to make sure that people hear more of the stories of why just getting rid of a regulation is not as simple as that sounds, that it affects real people and that it could affect their family as well as people they love.
We just have a half a minute to the end of the hour, Congressman. What should we be looking for in this coming week here?
You know, I'll tell you, Tom, I've quit trying to answer a question like that. Every week I get surprised by this president. Like I said, you know, the one piece of advice I give people a lot, if he talks about something, often it's not going to happen. But I worry about the stuff he doesn't talk about that all of a sudden he does. So sometimes it may be good if he's talking about it because it's just his bravado, and then we know. I'm starting to read some signals, but you know, keep watching North Korea, clearly important, and make sure they're not backdooring some healthcare legislation that's going to hurt a lot of people.
And you mentioned quite a bit of traveling you're doing. I'm assuming people can find your schedule over at pocan.house.gov?
In some cases. I mean, I'll be at Netroots Nation doing a couple panels in different spots. We'll be doing some town halls in this area, too.
Okay, great. Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, as always.
Great talking with you. Middays with Mark. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
And welcome back to Thom Hartmann University, to our book club. We're reading today from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. And this is from page 60. The chapter is Extinctions, Diversity Supports Survival. The consolidation of power and wealth in the hands of a very few rich individuals and multinational corporations has made some businessmen and politicians rich, but it's also aggregating and wiping out resources. We're directly competing with every other form of life on the planet. As long as there was more out there to exploit, growth was possible. Now, as we approach the closed limits of our planet's capacities to generate food and process our wastes, sustainable growth has to be re-examined for the oxymoron it is. And even if nature doesn't kill us off, it seems that we're bent on doing it ourselves, or to ourselves. Pesticide use in the United States is up over 3,000% since World War II. Yet more pesticides doesn't mean fewer crops lost to insects. To the contrary, we're losing 20% more of our crops to insects than in 1945. But because of increasing insect resistance to pesticides and mechanized farming techniques, the pesticide industry has economically addicted many farmers to their product. Harmless species are disappearing, but no harmful insect species has been eradicated. But while the insects, who can evolve through hundreds to millions of generations during the period of a single human lifespan generation, are becoming immune to our pesticides, we are not. This leaves us vulnerable to the poisons that we ourselves manufacture to kill off another species. For example, in September 1997, the New York Times featured a story by reporter John H. Cushman Jr. titled, "Cancer in Kids Increases, New Toxins Suspected." The story chronicled how the rate of cancer among children in the United States has skyrocketed since the 1970s, when we were using far less than half of the agricultural chemicals we are now, to the point now where the odds are 1 in 600 of a child born today getting cancer before the age of 10. Childhood cancer has become the second leading cause of childhood death behind accidents, and is now the most common fatal childhood disease, accounting for fully 10% of all childhood deaths. Since 1973, for example, rates of acute lymphoblastic leukemia increased 27% in boys and girls, and brain cancer is up 40% over the same period. 99% of all U.S. mother's milk today contains detectable levels of DDT. In 1950, it was found that 0.5%, 0.5% of U.S. male college students were infertile. In 1978, a study found that number had skyrocketed to 25%. And in the past 32 years, the average American male's sperm production has dropped by 30%. Some researchers attribute this to the accumulation of chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides, which are often intended to render insects sterile, while others speculate that some plastics used in food packaging mimic the female hormone estrogen, and may be demasculizing men and increasing the risk of breast and uterine cancer in women. But that's just the beginning of the problem. In 1960, routine feeding of antibiotics to farm animals was virtually unknown. Antibiotic administration of meat animals has increased so much since then, however, that today over 55% of all antibiotics manufactured in the United States are put into animals or animal feed. This has turned our livestock into a vast breeding ground for antibiotic-resistant microorganisms. The American pharmaceutical and meat industries don't consider this a problem, nor do the politicians to whom they contribute millions of dollars a year, and continue to support the routine administration of these drugs to dairy and meat animals. But that stance is hardly supported by any common knowledge in science. The European Economic Community, the Common Market, has banned American meat products grown with antibiotics. Why? The research which so concerned the Europeans showed that in 1960, only 13% of American human staphylococcus infections were resistant to penicillin. By 1988, however, the number of penicillin-resistant staph infections in Americans had exploded to over 90%. Muppets creator Jim Henson was killed by such a drug-resistant infection, for example, despite his substantial wealth and his access to the most sophisticated and expensive healthcare system in the world. And it's not just on land. Ocean studies specialist James W. Porter of the University of Georgia points to the explosion of human viruses and bacteria filling the water of the planet's oceans, killing off coral reefs and spreading disease among humans and other life forms. He projects that 20 to 30% of coral reefs are at risk, with a 446% increase in infections just since 1996 among the reefs he has been monitoring off the Florida coast. University of South Florida researcher Joan B. Rose points out that between 20 and 24% of all people swimming in Florida's coastal beaches become infected with viruses, which can cause heart disease, ear infections, sore throats and eyes, meningitis, gastrointestinal disease, hepatitis, and diabetes. About 1%, she says, become chronically infected. Similarly, a sampling of shellfish from New York waters found over 40% infected with human pathogens. And a sampling of water from the Waikiki Beach in Hawaii found that more than a third of the samples tested were infected with human viruses. At the same time, Vermont ice cream manufacturer Ben & Jerry's is suing the government. They want to put on the label of their ice cream that the milk they use is from cows free of synthetic growth hormones, and it continues with that sort of story. So this is just, one piece of the last hours of ancient sunlight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A bunch of the news that's going on right now. It turns out that 2 weeks ago, Paul Manafort, the guy who used to work in Ukraine, who was the first, I don't know what the title was, the head of the Trump campaign, president of the campaign or chairman or whatever. I don't know. Nobody knows here. Anyway, whatever it was. That Manafort, the feds did a no-knock search. They basically, this is where, they show up and kick in the door or some variation on that. And they typically only do this when this is a pre-dawn raid, in fact, the sun wasn't even up. They typically do this kind of thing when they fear that there is a possibility that evidence will be destroyed or when they're trying to seriously intimidate somebody. And, my guess would be that there's an element of both here. Maybe trying to get Manafort to flip and spill the beans on others in the Trump administration. I don't know. We'll see. But keep an eye on this spot. I mean, it's just now being reported, but this happened 2 weeks ago, and that's a big deal. Betsy DeVos's brother, Eric Prince, had a meeting with Donald Trump and friends where he made the sales pitch of, even though he's hiding out in another country nowadays most of the time, he's a major Republican donor, major Trump donor, his sister's in the cabinet, all this kind of stuff. And he's like, hey, we've got airplanes, we've got soldiers, we've got a mercenary army for you. We could take over the war in Iraq, or Afghanistan, excuse me. And the Pentagon has just said, no, we're not going to do that. Just a quick heads up, I got a note from Ken Chestik, the chair of Wyoming Promise, and he's talking about how they're working on trying to, in Wyoming, work on the idea of a constitutional convention, or not a convention, but a constitutional amendment that says that corporations aren't people and money is not speech. And the website, if you want to check it out, is wyomingprogress.org. And it looks to me like a pretty good organization. 20 things Mike Pence did when you weren't looking and why it matters. This from medium.com. And it's just, it gives you a pretty good sense of who Mike Pence is, what his values are, what his priorities are. And I'll just very quickly run through this list, and we will be picking up your phone calls in just a minute. But in January, Pence and others lobbied Trump to take hardline positions on abortion, making good on his forced pregnancy campaign pledges. He has led the charge to advance Trump's policy agenda in general. For example, he tweeted, "Obamacare will be replaced with something that actually works, bringing freedom and individual responsibility back to American health care. Yes, you are free to die like a dog in the gutter, and you are individually responsible for your own hospital bills." Oh, Mike Pence, you're so smart. Number 3, he's been vocal about supporting the use of tax dollars to fund religious schools. Again, he tweeted, "This is National School Choice Week. POTUS and I are committed to making a great education possible for all our children." In other words, let's take tax dollars and give them to religious zealots. Number 4, in January, Pence met with anti-abortion activists at the White House and delivered a speech at the annual March for Life. This is a guy who is very, very committed to forcing any woman who becomes pregnant under any circumstances to carry that baby to term, even if it means a risk to her health. One of the more dangerous things that can happen to a woman in her life is to become pregnant. People die from pregnancy. But, Pence doesn't care. He's a man. Number 5, Pence spent much of February selling the nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court as mainstream. Right. This guy has got probably the most far-right ideology of anybody who's been on the Supreme Court since the 1920s. And Mike Pence, sold him. He cast the tie-breaking vote to put Betsy DeVos in as Secretary of Education. I think most Americans have completely forgotten that. Congress was not willing to make this right-wing billionaire, brother of Eric Prince, heir to the families that basically own Republican politics in the state of Michigan. This billionaire Betsy DeVos, who's never went to public school, never taught in public school, as far as anybody could tell, never even walked into a public school until she became Education Secretary, putting her in charge. The guy who was pushing this, and by the way, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins voted against Betsy DeVos. The guy who was pushing this, Mike Pence, and he cast the tie-breaking vote. In May, he was named the head of the Voter Suppression Commission. Chris Kobach gets all the publicity, but Mike Pence is actually the head of this thing. The so-called Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. How can we suppress more votes of poor people, people of color, older people, and students? Number 8, Pence invited anti-abortion activists to the White House to discuss how to merge their agenda with that of the Trump administration. Specifically asking them, what do you want to see in the American health care bill, right? This was their repeal and replace thing that went down in flames. Later that month, he cast the tie-breaking vote to nullify a Title X rule from the Obama era that Title X funds could be used for family planning. He said, nope, can't do that. Sorry, poor women are not entitled to birth control. If they get pregnant, we will pass regulations forcing the government to require their pregnancy be carried to term. But, so we'll regulate their pregnancy, but we're not going to, offer them birth control pills. Number 10, Mike Pence met with members of the financial industry and championed efforts to roll back Dodd-Frank consumer protections. In other words, he's on the take from the banksters. It's just real simple. He's just a shill for the banksters. Meeting with community bankers at the White House. I said the Choice Act is a common sense bill that repeals Dodd-Frank. Right. Because we all just want to be back under the thumbs of the big banks, right? Even more so than we are already. In May, Pence addressed a Campaign for Life gala. This is the so-called Susan B. Anthony list. Well, not so-called. That's what they call themselves. It's a forced pregnancy group. Number 12, Pence played a role in urging Trump to sign a religious liberty executive order during the National Day of Prayer ceremony. This is, religious liberty is a phrase that the Christian Taliban uses to say we're entitled to tax dollars. Number 13, Pence addressed the first ever World Summit in defense of persecuted Christians. Right, because Christians are so badly persecuted in the United States. The 14, well, to give him some due, you know, some Christians in parts of the world are persecuted. They weren't being persecuted in Iraq. They were protected by Saddam Hussein until we decided to stupidly invade that country. They weren't being persecuted by Bashar al-Assad. They were protected in Syria until we got involved in that. Libya, they were being protected by Gaddafi, but all bets are off now because of the insanity of Republican foreign policy. At the University of Notre Dame, he gave a commencement address saying political. He said, far too many college campuses across America have become characterized by speech codes, safe zones, tone policing, administration-sanctioned political correctness, all of which amounts to nothing less than the suppression of freedom of speech. In other words, hey, when our hate speech guys come to your campus, you really should stand up and listen to what they have to say. In May, he started his own political action committee called the Great America Committee. In other words, in May, basically, Mike Pence decided he was going to run for president. Don't tell Donald Trump. He'll get very upset. In June, he was put in charge of space policy. He's raised money for his PAC and other political causes, number 17. Number 18, on June 23rd, he addressed Focus on the Family. Focus on the Family, one of the biggest of the bigoted organizations that work to destroy the lives of gay people. LGBTQ people. Number 19, as special elections have popped up around the country, Pence has been hitting the campaign trail in support of his fellow Republicans. You can't really criticize him for that. I mean, that's number 20, Pence has been pressuring Congress to implement anti-trans policies in the military. You can criticize him for that. That's pretty vicious. You know, the point that they make is that this matters because Pence might not always be vice president. And so... anyhow, there's that. Also, yesterday, you know, the big topic we were asking throughout the day was, you know, who would be worse for America, Trump or Pence? This was all before Trump came out and said, right after I got off the air yesterday, came out and said, you know, that North Korea, if they continue to threaten us, not if they take action against us, but if they continue to talk, that they are going to see fire. And you know, essentially destruction. I mean, you know, he threatened them with nuclear weapons if they don't shut up. Now, keep in mind, this is the guy who, in the transcripts that were released a couple of days ago of his conversations with Malcolm Turnbull in Australia and President Peña Nieto in Mexico. In both cases, he begged both presidents to say things or not to say things that would embarrass him. You know, remember he said to the president of Mexico, you can't keep talking about how you're not going to pay for the wall because it's embarrassing me. It makes me look terrible. So now he is saying to, I think this is a variation on the same thing. He's saying to Kim Jong-un, you quit talking like that because it makes me look bad. And if you don't quit talking like that, I'm going to nuke you. Well, you know, our Ian Millhiser has a great piece over at Think Progress right now about how our nuclear system is designed so that only one man can trigger the firing of nukes, and that's the president. And he can do it in about a 2-minute window. And, you know, at the most, 5-6 minutes for it to be fully implemented. And it's very, very hard to stop once it's started. We need to reconsider this. Serious stuff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Your thoughts and mine after this. And welcome back. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I'm a little worried about this situation because what I see is a man who wants to throw one nuke and then everybody has his name in the paper for a month.
Right.
Once you start...
Assuming there are still papers.
All the way. You got to go hard, fast, and all the way. Finish. Otherwise, our people are going to be in danger.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your solution, Corky?
My solution is that the grown-ups in the Congress have got to come in and stop this guy, impeach him or something.
That's really the only mechanism right now. I mean, if Donald Trump were to say, bring me the football, And they actually brought him the briefcase with the codes. Now, if I was the guy, I would just hand him a football, right? Say, there you go. And he wouldn't know what to do with it. Or maybe we could play a good, you know,
And send it downstairs.
game. Yeah, we could play a good game of touch football. But that's kind of a joke, I suppose. But if he were to say, give me the football, here's the launch codes, and then just, you know, made the phone call and said, okay, here's the code, you know, 394126, you know, shoot it off against these, you know, take out Pyongyang. There's virtually no way to stop that unless the military ignores his order, much like they ignored his order on trans people in the military. This is a really important question, is, you know, should the military ignore the order of the President of the United States? And if so, what happens to whom as a consequence of that?
They got to. You got to ignore it.
Well, no. I mean, there's this thing called the chain of command, and the President of the United States is the commander-in-chief of the military. It's right there in, you know, Article 2 of the Constitution. And if you're in the military and the commander-in-chief gives you an order, unless you're certain that it's or you're willing to, you know, litigate it, that it's not a lawful order, you've got to do it. And the other thing that Ian Millhiser pointed out is that each one of these nuclear stations has 5 teams of 2 people, because it takes 2 people to launch a nuclear missile. You have to turn the key from 2 different locations and talk to each other while you're doing it. So one person can't do it, you know, by stretching out their arms really wide. And so that's supposed to be part of the fail-safe mechanism. But if one team of 2 people refuses to do it, there's 4 other teams for every nuclear launch site around the world. And, you know, odds are at least one of those teams is staffed by Trumpistas. You know, I'm wondering, I mean, this all goes back to back when, you know, we were all afraid that Nikita Khrushchev was going to, you know, fire nukes at us. I don't think that anybody in the current Russian government would be crazy enough to start a nuclear war. And I don't think that anybody in Europe would be crazy enough to start a nuclear war. I am concerned about Pakistan and India. You know, I'm very concerned about North Korea. But you know, none of those would necessarily require a nuclear response from us. I think it's very unlikely that we're going to end up in a nuclear war with China. The other nuclear countries, Britain, France, and Israel, are all allies of ours. So maybe it's time to change our policy on how we deal with nuclear weapons. You know, it's or what kind of authority we've given the president, particularly given that this is not a constitutional power anyway. Corky, thanks for the call. It's an interesting concept or an interesting question. Should we change the way that the president, you know, as a consequence of Donald Trump being president, should we change the policies, the systems for launching nuclear weapons? We'll do that.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Brian in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I called you yesterday, and you said you were going to look into the People's Platform, and I did a poor job of identifying. It's also part of the Summer for Progress movement.
Yeah, I actually have it right here in front of me. Medicare for all, college for all, $15 minimum wage, women's health care rights, automatic voter registration, ending private prisons, Wall Street tax, and 100% renewable energy. And I'm totally down with all of those things.
I figured you were, Tom.
And thanks for the tease. Thanks for the wake up on it, Brian.
Yeah, and to your listeners, the idea is that they all sign this People's Platform petition, and then teams will descend on their local Congress person's offices and try to get them to sign and commit to supporting the 8 pieces of legislation that you just rattled
Did
off.
this come out of our revolution?
It did, Tom. PDA also had a lot to do with it, Progressive Democrats of America, and the National Nurses United.
Yeah. This is great stuff.
Other groups.
This is great stuff, and I'd love to see the Progressive Caucus pick this up, and a whole bunch of other groups push it forward. So that's a good one.
Well, I just so much appreciate you giving me the time, Tom.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for the heads up, Brian. I appreciate it. I don't know how I missed that. I know that I'd read it before and I'd talked about it before, but it had not stuck in my head as being this big consequential thing. I thought it was just another one of dozens of policy proposals that were flying through it. This is a solid one. Thanks for the call. Jackie in Chicago. Hey, Jackie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, first time caller.
Thank you.
Love your show. I'm calling. Congressman Pocamp's gone. I wanted to talk about how the water rights were affected, are going to be affected in Wisconsin, but he's not there to answer that. But I have another question regarding Sinclair Media and what's stopping them right now? That's what I'm not clear on. What's stopping them right now is the FCC rule.
Well, yes and no. The FCC had a rule that said that no company could own television stations that reached more than 39% of the American public. The Ajit Pai, the head of the FCC, changed that rule to make it 79% of the American public, which by coincidence is how much of the American public Sinclair Media will be able to reach when they buy Tribune Media, if I'm reading the news stories on this accurately. Now, it's conceivable that I'm wrong, or it's conceivable that this is a contemplated action rather than a done deal. But my understanding is that the change in the rules is a done deal, that the approval has not yet happened because it both has to come from the FCC and also from, I believe, the Commerce Department oversees, maybe it's the DOJ, oversees corporate mergers. But it looks like this is something that the Trump administration wants to make happen. I mean, after all, this is a broadcast group that runs right-wing, must air op-eds on television with some frequency, and they are, probably to the right of Fox News, actually. So it's a concern. It's a real concern. Jackie, thanks for the call. We'll keep an eye on this, and I'll continue reporting on it. But this FCC, Ajit Pai, the guy who Donald Trump made the head of the FCC, is just a total shill for the big corporations, the big monopolies, and the big internet service providers. A total shill, and he is going to destroy net neutrality.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls. What do you think about this situation in North Korea? What should we do? Should we change our nuclear policies? What might Trump do? Is this a good idea or a bad idea? Right after this.
And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, The Fate of the World and What We Can Do About It. And this is from page 165, The Lives of Ancient People. From the San and the Kogi Value, Community, and Cooperation, we are part of the world, not separate from it. The chapter. One of the oldest cultures on Earth is that of the Kung Bushman. It's an exclamation mark to make the noise. Of the Kalahari Desert in the northern parts of South Africa. The exclamation point in their name kung represents a sound in their language which we don't have in English. It's a popping noise made in the mouth by forming a vacuum between the tongue and the top of the mouth and then pulling the tongue down quickly. There are 3 other sounds in their language for which we have no letters, all of them clicks or pops, made by similarly clicking the tongue against the front of the mouth or the sides of the mouth and teeth. They're such a unique culture that although they're ancient, their language contains sounds that have traveled to no other human tongue on Earth. Over the past few decades, as they become more well-known, they've asked anthropologists and linguists that they be called the San, although most texts from before the 1980s refer to them as the Kung. They and their life are portrayed wonderfully well in the film The Gods Must Be Crazy. The San are racially distinct from the other Africans who have conquered the continent in the past millennia. Their skin is more yellow than black, and their eyes are slightly slanted as if they share a common ancestor with Asians, or perhaps are indeed an early ancestor of the Asians. Their hair is black and curly like other Africans, but they're comparatively short and thin, often standing less than 5 feet tall and weighing fewer than 100 pounds. The lives of the San were first chronicled quite elegantly by Lawrence Vanderpost, a South African explorer and writer. In his 1961 book, The Heart of the Hunter, he tells of coming across a small Kung tribe of about a dozen adults and children as they crossed a particularly hot and barren part of the desert. Vanderpost and his fellow explorers started hunting some game so the bushmen could have extra food to carry on their journey toward the lightning on the horizon, where the seasonal rains were beginning. The explorers spent an entire day hunting with their Land Rovers and provisioned the bushmen well for their trip. As the little tribe was leaving, Vanderpost and his group stood to wave goodbye, but the bushmen simply walked off with many smiles. No thank yous were ever given for all that food. One of Vanderpost's assistants, a hunter who'd never encountered bushmen before, commented that they seemed ungrateful and uncaring. Ben, one of the other men in the group who understood bushman culture, responded that to give another human food and water is only good manners and is routine behavior among the bushmen. If the white men had been starving on a long trek and the bushmen had found them, they would immediately share their food and water, even if it endangered their own survival, and they would not expect a thank you in response. In fact, in San bushman culture, to eat in front of another person who is without food is considered an immoral act, every bit as horrific as if in our culture a person were to walk out onto a busy city sidewalk, pull down their pants, and defecate. Everyone would be shocked and horrified. As it happens, the San do say thank you. They do it whenever they're hunting, when they're making a decision to take a life. No animal is killed for food by the San without being thanked by them, both at the time of the hunt and later when a dance is done for the soul of the animal. And animals are only killed when there is a clear need for food. For those of us who grew up in modern civilization, it's difficult to imagine a life and culture where such fundamental things are simply taken for granted. When we stop behind a car at a red light, we don't open the door and run up to the car in front of us to thank them for being so considerate as to follow the basic rules of the road and stop for the red light. It's simply a given that everybody does that. No thanks are required. Thanking people for doing something implies they had a choice to do otherwise and did so out of a desire to be nice. But imagine a world where feeding another person is as much an automatic response as stopping at a red light. A world where a person who fails to feed or care for another is ostracized or punished, the way we give people tickets when they run red lights. Where the care of others is more important than even the care of yourself. Where the teaching all things that you should want others to do to you, do ye even so unto them, is actually practiced. Not out of an effort, but as part of a daily routine, as the normal way things are, as the basic assumption of a society. That is San culture, the way of an older culture. A story of a storyteller of Chippewa and Cree ancestry told me that his people have a belief that if a person visits your home and you fail to share with them food and water so that they leave hungry or thirsty, and then the Creator decides to take them home at that time, they will arrive in the spirit world hungry and thirsty. He said the responsibility for that person's condition in the world is yours because you were the last person he met and you had an opportunity to feed him. So we have an obligation to feed and give water and shelter and whatever else a person may need whenever they come into our village or our home. In our younger culture, we value productivity and individual possession. In their older culture, they value community. Most modern people find it difficult or impossible to imagine a world where community is more important than possessions. Yet this is how about 1% of the world's population still lives and how all of your and my ancestors lived for hundreds of thousands of years. In 1997, a group of 13 researchers released a study in which they quantified the value of all the environments on the planet. from measuring the size of the Louisiana shrimp harvest to how much people were willing to pay for access to a lake, coral reef, or other natural attraction. They concluded that the planet's natural areas were worth about $33 trillion. And then from there, I go on to talk about how that's a crazy way to value anything. And we need to be, revisiting these ancient culture values. The book is The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, this is distressing. The New York Times, Peter Baker and Glenn Thrush reporting in the New York Times, has just came out. President Trump delivered his fire and fury threat to North Korea on Tuesday, yesterday, with arms folded, jaws set, and eyes flitting on what appeared to be a single page of talking points set before him on the conference table at his New Jersey golf resort. This is the first paragraph, first sentence as well. I remember watching that on TV thinking he's looking at a set of talking points in front of him. They have to have, somebody has to have come up with that phrase, fire and fury. And they have to have, run it past the Joint Chiefs and made sure that this is appropriate because he's reading it off the page in front of him. Turns out I was wrong. The piece of paper, back to the reporting by Peter Baker and Glenn Thrush, the piece of paper, as it turned out, was a fact sheet on the opioid crisis he had come to talk about. And his ominous warning to Pyongyang was entirely improvised, according to several people with direct knowledge of what unfolded. In discussions with advisors beforehand, he had not run the specific language by them. So we've got a president who is doing a bad Cleavon Little imitation. If I'm remembering the actor's name, who was in Blazing Saddles, the guy who put the gun to his own head and said, I'm going to shoot him, I'm going to shoot him. And they're like, oh, no, don't shoot, don't shoot. And he kind of gets away. It was just an iconic scene, brilliant acting. The difference is that when Cleavon Little did that in Blazing Saddles, he was playing the role. He was an actor playing the role of a sane guy who was playing the role of a crazy person, right? Just to get out of the situation where everybody was going to shoot him because he was the black guy who had, come into this white town. But in this situation, the president isn't trying to play the role of someone who's crazy. He is crazy. As far as I can tell, I mean, this is like, Jim Mattis, H.R. McMaster, these guys had no idea this was coming. Steve Bannon apparently didn't even know. This is not a good one. And then in the article, but in the North Korea debate, like the similar one over Afghanistan, Mr. Bannon has been arguing against what his side considers the excessively militant approach to the war party of General McMaster. And while Mr. Bannon has his own channel to the president, he has been shut out of most formal discussions of North Korea by the National Security Team. Neither camp, that's the Bannon peace camp or the McMaster war camp, neither camp advocated language like fire and fury, according to the people involved. Among those taken by surprise, they said, was John F. Kelly, the retired four-star Marine general who has just taken over as White House Chief of Staff and had been with the president at the golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey for his working vacation. This is scary stuff. What do we do about this? And this is, apropos of the point of Ian Millhiser's piece that, the president can launch a nuclear war with no discussion with anybody. And it happens so fast, nobody can stop it. Should we take that power away from the President of the United States? Should it be in the hands of essentially a professional bureaucrat, a small committee, a couple of people, one person who, is like, a wise elder emeritus type, somebody who's been in Congress for years and years and knows how things work and has a level head, somebody, Jan Schakowsky kind of person, or I don't know if she's been there years and years, but you get the point. Somebody who is not an extreme ideologue, somebody who's got
really, really solid, understanding of what's going on. I don't know what to do with this. This is bizarre. Wayne in Chicago. Hey, Wayne, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom, that power should be taken away from the president. Do you remember the guys on the submarine, the Russian sub, and they were told to launch because Russia was under attack, and there was one guy who saved the world and wouldn't turn the key.
That's right, and it was a false order to launch, wasn't it? Wasn't there was something got scrambled between Moscow and the sub?
Say that again.
Wasn't it a false launch order that something got scrambled between Moscow and the submarine?
No, it was an order to launch. It wasn't a false order; it was a real order.
Ah.
But they thought, you know what? I guess it was a false order because the United States wasn't attacking Russia.
Right.
So, but they were told they were submarines. They're underwater. They told to launch. It was like 3 men, and each one had the certain code.
Right.
One guy, and when he went back home, he was ostracized, and he saved the world.
Right.
So we need to take that power away from one man.
Yeah.
But anyway, Tom, I want to give you my analysis of North Korea, where I've been feeling about North Korea for years.
Please.
North Korea wants to hold the world for ransom. So that's why they huff and puff like the wolf who wants to blow the house down. They want to hold the world for hostage. We're going to huff and puff. We're going to threaten. If you pay us, we'll back off. Now, we've paid them before and they backed off, but they never stopped trying to create their nuclear capabilities. So Kim is playing to his audience, the people of South Korea. Trump is playing to his audience, his base. The media is just super hysteria, hyping everybody up. Nothing's going to happen. You know why I say nothing's going to happen, Tom? Kim is a king in his kingdom.
Well, that's my perspective on this, Wayne, is that he is a cult leader. He's basically Jim Jones, David Koresh, Warren Jeffs. Pick your cult. He's living high on the hog. He's got all the sex he wants, all the drugs he wants, all the alcohol he wants, all the parties he wants, and he wants to keep it that way.
There you go. He doesn't want to give that up.
Right.
The elite under him, they do not want to give that up, and they're not going to give it up.
Yep.
But if he doesn't shut up, he's got maybe a loose cannon with Trump, because Trump is getting tired of the threats. I'm getting tired of the threats. I know everybody's getting tired of them. But this is just a ploy he's making to try to get money. They have a super computer team. They got into they went through Bangladesh and stole $81 million. As a matter of fact, they stole between $4 and $6 billion just through cyber attacks. So it's not the missiles we got to worry about; it's the cyber attacks.
Yeah, in fact, there's some speculation that these ransomware attacks that spread around the world a couple of weeks ago were actually coming out of North Korea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you remember first they were doing the counterfeit money.
Yeah.
So they let that go. That wasn't.
And then they were doing counterfeit drugs. They were doing designer drugs. Probably still are.
Yeah, they're hustlers. They do anything they can to get money, including steal.
Yep.
So nothing's going to happen if Trump doesn't attack. If Trump attacks, then they'll retaliate. But I'm telling you for a fact, nothing's going to happen. The guy's a king. He wants to retain his kingdom. And his subjects under him want to retain their titles too.
Yeah, I agree. The main thing that I think Kim has to worry about is a revolt from beneath as more and more North Koreans start getting access to South Korean media and figure out what it's like to live in South Korea compared to where they live. And, the question is how long can he hold on to that? And part of his equation is as long as he has a huge external enemy, he can rally his people behind him against that enemy. Wayne,
You're
thanks
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I mean, this is how despots and dictators do it. This is how, when I used to live in Germany, this is all the castles of Europe. The kings were all, the hordes are coming.
Welcome back. Ronald in Waxhaw, North Carolina. Am I saying it right, Ronald?
Yes.
Hey, what's up?
Isn't it ironic that 72 years ago, the anniversary of the bombing of Japan, that we're talking about using nuclear weapons?
Yeah, it was 72 years ago yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah. Today was Nagasaki, and I think the 6th was...
The 6th was Hiroshima. Okay.
Yeah, and all we got to do is look at the newsreels and see the damage that it's done. And somebody should say, "Hey, do we want this?"
Yeah. On the other hand, Pyongyang, the capital city of North Korea, at the end of the Korean War in 1953, had been literally reduced to rubble that there was only one building left standing in the entire city. So the North Koreans, just like our firebombing of Tokyo actually did more damage, I believe,
more damage
than Hiroshima or Nagasaki individually. So, yes, there's horrors associated with nuclear weapons, and they're multi-generational horrors because you get this whole, damaging people's DNA and everything else. But, that said, North Korea is no newbies, no neophytes when it comes to utter destruction, and they have climbed back from that utter destruction, and so they may be less afraid of it than, for example, we are, who have not experienced anything like that since the Civil War. So
yeah, I agree, and I explained this yesterday to my grandson. He's 7 years old. About the history of it, and when he got all done, he said, "Well, gee, I hope they never do that again."
Yeah.
Well, why didn't the adults say that? Hey.
Yeah, out of the mouths of babes. I'm with you, Ronald. I'm with you. I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Kevin in Carmichael, California, watching Free Speech on Roku. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hi, Tom. The thing I'm thinking about, and it's kind of worrying me, I don't know how crazy it is, but I read a lot of history. I read a lot about ancient Rome, and I'm thinking about, this thing with Korea turning into like a Praetorian Guard situation with Trump, and them deciding that he's just lost it, and the military basically just taking him out, and becoming kingmaker. What do you think about that?
If I'm understanding what you're saying, you're suggesting that if Trump ordered a strike, the military might say no, and that effectively would be a military coup, and at that point you've got a constitutional crisis. Is that what you're talking about?
Basically.
Yeah. Well, then, geez, that's a hell of a question. I mean, we've never been confronted with that. Nobody, when Jack Kennedy was president, we were, holding our breath at the possibility of a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Nobody was questioning his competence to handle that crisis. Everybody, well, not everybody, but I think the vast majority of the world right now is questioning the ability of Donald Trump to deal with this crisis. And particularly now that we know that his whole, fire and whatever it was, fire and fury from yesterday was something that he just pulled out of his backside. I mean, he pulled this thing out of his left ear and threw it out there, and it's like, really? I mean, you're gonna threaten another nation with nuclear annihilation without consulting with your military advisors, without consulting with your State Department, without talking to Congress. I mean, this is 25th Amendment stuff. This, in my mind, is an indication of a man who's mentally ill. We'll be back. Kevin, thank you for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I think we were supposed to have Ellen Ratner, but she's not on the board, Nate. She's calling back in just a moment. Okay, in just a moment, Ellen Ratner will call back. The thing that I wanted to say about Donald Trump is that, and I said it just a second ago, but I want to repeat it. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, nobody doubted John Kennedy's ability to deal with this level of crisis. Right now, you've got Donald Trump in the midst of a nuclear crisis, and he is scaring the hell out of not just America, but the entire planet. And, lots of people are doubting his ability to deal with this. What do we do as a country? I mean, we set up this system
based on the assumption that a man who would be in the White House would be a man of at least some honor, integrity, and intellect, and that's not what we have. So anyhow, let me put that on the table as the question for the next hour. Right now, Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News is on the line with us. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen's new book, Loving What You Do, available from fine bookstores and booksellers everywhere. Ellen, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you so much. Well, listen, you were talking about honor and integrity, and now we know that Michael Caputo, he was one of Trump's campaign people. He had to register as a lobbyist, and then he began to get, of course, a lot of money. Now he's also going against the Trump administration, and he's organizing an event in front of the people that give us our various, when you, I'm blocking on it, when you get a patent. He's going in front of the patent office, and he's going against the Trump administration. Money will do anything.
Huh, apparently.
You can't even make this stuff up.
Yeah.
Okay. Then Trump tweeted out today, there will never be a time that we are not the most powerful nation in the world. Well, I happen to know from Africa that China is sending people over to China from Africa, and they also built housing in Grenada after the hurricane there and all that kind of stuff, that they're saying that they're going to be the most powerful nation in the world in 20 years. So what are we going to do about that?
Yeah, I wrote about this in 1996 in my book, Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, how China was planning on, the next century was going to be the Chinese century. They were unambiguous about it. You had the British century, the American century, and now it's time for the Chinese century. But
now we have a story up. There was a guy named Robert Miller, and he worked for a company, Honeywell, STS it's called, and it was their Phoenix office. And he basically wanted to sabotage the company because he hadn't gotten a raise, and then he was fired. And then Miller had unauthorized access to this STS, and an FBI agent posed as a Mexican cartel leader, and he contacted Miller. He set up a meeting, and then Miller was willing to sell him the access he had gotten for $2 million. Well, of course, he was arrested.
Wait a minute, you're not talking the Miller who's in the White House, Steve Miller?
No, this is a whole separate Miller.
Oh, okay. All right.
But still quite amazing that somebody would try and do that to the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul Manafort. As you know, he was the campaign chair for Donald Trump. He testified before Congress on July 25th. The morning of July 26th, in the very early morning, there was a no-knock raid done on his home. Agents left with papers. There's no news as to what, but people are speculating that what they really got was bank records, because if you have a foreign bank account, you have to declare it. And if he hadn't declared it, and there's a good chance he had a foreign bank account, he was paid $17 million to run a Ukraine campaign for a pro-Russian president.
Right. This is these are the ledgers that they found after I want to say Yanukovych. I mix up the Ukrainian guys, but after the guy got deposed, they found this ledger, and it showed cash payments to Paul Manafort of millions, over $10 million.
$17 million.
Yeah.
But the question is, did he have any foreign bank accounts that he didn't declare?
Yeah, because Manafort has been claiming that he never saw that money.
Right, but of course not.
Right.
And Bob Ney says if there's one Trumper that's going to jail, it's Paul Manafort.
Yeah, I agree. The question in my mind, I think that, Mike Flynn going to jail might be enough to provoke Donald Trump to a pardon because he seems so bonded to Mike Flynn. I have no idea how he feels about Paul Manafort.
Well, I don't either, but you can imagine that Trump will probably pardon any one of his old ex-guys. That's my guess.
Yeah, that would be my guess, too.
Yeah. Okay. John Kasich, if the New Hampshire primary will be held today, John Kasich, he is the governor of the great state of Ohio, the state I'm from, and apparently he would beat Donald Trump if the primary were held in New Hampshire today.
Wow.
Now, he had originally trailed, he was in second place, but he got 19 percentage points behind in the New Hampshire primary. So he didn't do very well.
Right. But he's been, ever since Trump's election, Kasich has been the go-to guy for a rational Republican voice,
So I think he's...
That's right. And, you know, I gave a party in Cleveland, Ohio at the Republican National Convention because I'm from Cleveland. So, of course, I gave a party in Cleveland. And John Kasich came to my party, but he didn't go to the convention.
Well, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah, this guy, he's a very smart politician, John Kasich.
Right. And, you know, it's interesting because I have a cousin by marriage that's running against Sherrod Brown for senator.
Right.
And he was, you know, this good little Republican boy until he wrote 2 op-eds against Governor Kasich taking money from the Obama administration for Medicaid.
Oh, that's interesting. That's not going to help cousin, Howie? Josh? What's his name?
Josh Mandel.
Josh, yeah, cousin Josh.
Don't vote for him.
Very interesting. Okay, what else is going on in the world, Ellen?
Okay, Nikki Tsongas. As you know, she was the husband of Senator Tsongas, who ran for president in 1992, died of cancer. She is not going to run for re-election. She succeeded Marty Meehan, who became chancellor of University of Massachusetts Lowell. And she just said it is time to do other things with her life. And so that's kind of interesting. She's been there almost 10 years. Well, when she completes it, it'll be 10 years.
That's interesting. I had no idea.
Okay. One little last story here, although there's a lot of other, actually there's a couple of stories here. This last weekend, there were 1,500 pounds of drugs and 17 fugitives at the Mexican border. U.S. Customs and Border Protection got that. It was 1,500 pounds of narcotics and 1,000 pounds of marijuana, 11 pounds of heroin, 72 pounds of cocaine.
Given how much pot they're growing in California right now legally, I don't understand why anybody would even bother to import it into the United States.
I don't either. And as you know, there is pot everywhere in California.
Yeah, it's and Oregon and Washington State. And,
well, I was in Washington State, every other corner, and I was with a bunch of women who are sober this last week, and everybody was astounded at how many companies there are.
Oh, and you need to go into those pot stores. They're spectacular. I mean, they've got huge selections, and you can buy plants that you can put in your garden. I mean, it's just incredible.
I've never been to one. We almost went to one, but
when we all go out to Portland for my daughter's wedding, we'll take you to one, Ellen.
Oh, I'd love to go see one. Okay. Now there is, if I have a little more seconds here, I don't.
We have 1 more minute.
Okay. There's a new report done by the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. They say the projected cost of discharging the military's transgender troops at $960 million. That's almost $1 billion. And they said that by kicking out transgender people, it's going to cost the military a lot more money. And that if they were to provide hormones, et cetera, for people who are transgender, that would cost $8.4 million a year. So if you implement President Trump's ban, it would cost $960 million versus $8.4 million.
Right. So Trump didn't even bother to talk to anybody about this, because who would be that stupid?
Nobody would be that stupid, but...
Well,
hey,
obviously Trump is.
What can I say?
Yeah, tragically. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News, brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen's new book, Loving What You Do. Ellen, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Great talking with you. Happy Wednesday. We will be back. Steve Wimberly is going to drop by. New movie out about Don Siegelman. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading from Walking Your Blues Away, How to Heal the Mind and Create Emotional Well-Being from Chapter 1, How Trauma Sticks and the Mechanism of PTSD. One of the enduring mysteries in the field of psychology is why the same event produces such different memories and responses in different people. As the New York Times reported in a July 1st, 2004 article, 1 out of every 6 soldiers coming home from the war in Iraq is showing signs of emotional difficulties, particularly post-traumatic stress disorder. Citing a report in the New England Journal of Medicine, the writer noted the researchers surveyed more than 6,000 soldiers in the month before and after service in Iraq and Afghanistan. Almost 17% of those who fought in Iraq reported symptoms of major depression, severe anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder, compared with 11% of the troops who served in Afghanistan. In World War II, post-war depression and anxiety was called battle fatigue. In World War I, we called it shell shock. The question isn't so much why it happens. We know GIs in war do and see horrific things. The question that perplexes us is why post-war anxiety and depression haunts some veterans and not others. Of course, some vets see harder combat than others, but even that doesn't account for the statistics. There are still huge variations among individual soldiers in how they respond to the same event. The same is true in the civilian world. Some people develop PTSD and others don't, facing the exact same circumstances. In order to understand why some people are still shocked months and even years after a traumatic event, it's necessary to first understand how the brain and mind processes trauma. The brain is a complex collection of deeply interconnected parts and processes. I'm vastly oversimplifying here for the purpose of description. In light of those caveats, here's a possible scenario that's not inconsistent with much of what's known about brain function. There's a part of the limbic brain, or visceral brain, called the hippocampus that's believed to function as a one-day scratch pad for memory. Everything you experience throughout the day is stored in the hippocampus. In order for the impressions of the experience to become a long-term memory, they must pass through the hippocampus into the rest of the brain. People with a damaged hippocampus remember past events but have extreme difficulty learning new things. Although the rest of the brain is able to integrate recent information from the hippocampus in relation to stored memories, in order to understand that one thing happened a week ago and another thing happened a month ago, the hippocampus knows only one time, today. During the night as we sleep, the hippocampus dumps its information from the day into the rest of the brain for processing, sorting, storing, and disposing of irrelevant information. As the brain is processing the details of the day from the hippocampus, we experience what we call dreaming. Many sleep researchers are convinced that when we experience REM sleep, most of the events, including the traumas of our daily life, are processed. The processing of information management completed. When we wake up in the morning, the hippocampus is once again empty and ready to record another day. The problem emerges when the hippocampus is carrying information that's too much or too hot for the larger brain/mind to handle. When a recent memory is too strong to be easily and unremarkably processed, it presents in our dream world as a nightmare. If that still doesn't download the information from the hippocampus, then the trauma either becomes buried in the subconscious, a process Freud referred to as repression, or it gets thrown back into the hippocampus the next morning. It's as if the brain says, whoa, that's too much for me to process in one evening. Please hang on to it for another day. When the person wakes up in the morning, the information's still there in the hippocampus, still remembered and known and felt as if it happened that same very day. The conjecture that the hippocampus knows little about the more distant past accounts for the unique feature of true PTSD, that the person feels every day as if the past event happened today, or at least in the very recent past. The trauma is always front, center, new, fresh, and raw. The consequences can be psychologically and emotionally devastating. Every day is affected by a past event. The traumatic event never passes from now until then and is never processed and filed away in the memory banks, where it loses the power to cause pain and problems on a daily basis. The impact of this on the mind and the emotions is staggering. Brain scans even demonstrate that before a PTSD event has been processed, the amygdala, a part of the brain responsible for strong emotional states, such as those involved with survival or the perception of a threat to survival, and the hippocampus are not functioning normally. The brain scan makes it possible to, in a way, see the effect of the stuck memory. After processing the memory, these parts of the brain usually return to normal functioning. One of the key concepts of many schools of psychology is that human beings are most functional when every part of the mind has access to all other parts. In particular, this functionality is a matter of having full access to positive resources, such as memories of times when we were successful in our undertakings and the good feelings we associate with those accomplishments. Working from this level of functionality, then, when we take on a new task, for example, we first remember times in the past when we attempted something similar and accomplished our goals. This functionality can be accessed in all endeavors, from embarking on a new love relationship to making your first public speaking engagement. Memories of past accomplishments and capabilities are stored in parts of the brain far from the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala and hippocampus, part of our brain's most primary and primitive structures, lie deep in the brain. Thus, having a negative memory stuck deep in the hippocampus blocks the pain and fear associated with that memory from reaching and associating with positive memories and resource states, which are housed in more distant parts of the brain. So in other words, if we don't get these traumatic memories out of the hippocampus, then everything coming in gets filtered through that and blocked having access to resource states that can help and heal us. So the rest of the book is how to get that stuff out of the hippocampus. The book is Walking Your Blues Away.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There is a really important piece to Donald Trump's statement yesterday about North Korea. I referred to it earlier, but I didn't put a spotlight on it. And I think there really should be a spotlight put on this. In the past, I mean, literally in the past 240 years of the history of the United States of America, we have, to the best of my knowledge, never had a president threaten a country that we were not actively engaged in armed conflict with. You know, FDR spoke ill of the Nazis. Harry Truman, after he bombed Hiroshima, said, you know, more fire is going to come out of the sky if you don't surrender. And they didn't surrender, and 3 or 4 days later, he bombed Nagasaki, at which point the Japanese said, okay, uncle, you know, we give. But those were threats to do things in the context of a war. And I realize that we're still at war with North Korea. There's an armistice, but there actually isn't even an armistice. There's a truce. There's no peace treaty. So technically we're at war with North Korea, but we're not in a shooting war with them, and we haven't been in a shooting war with them since 1953, as I recall, and maybe 54. I don't know. I was not 53. I was 1 year old, or 2 years old, so I was not paying attention. But there's a qualitative, a substantial and important, and it's really important, I think, to acknowledge this difference between what Donald Trump did yesterday and what every president has done before him. And that is that he said specifically, and he came right out and said it, he said that they need to stop threatening us. Now, Hugo Chavez has threatened us. Ahmadinejad from Iran has threatened us. Khrushchev threatened us, arguably. There has been no shortage
You know, certainly Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein and the Ayatollah Khomeini, and I mean, there's been no shortage of world leaders who at various times have threatened the United States. But what Donald Trump said, and I quote, North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met, and either they means North Korea or it means the threats, but the consequential meaning is the same. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. It's a very different thing to say if you attack South Korea, our ally, or if you attack our military bases in South Korea, or if you attack Guam, where we have a huge Air Force base. If you attack the United States, our interests, or our allies, we will turn you into a cinder. We will crisp you. That's pretty much conventional wisdom. But to say if you threaten to attack us, we will launch a nuclear strike against you, that is to threaten first use. That is to threaten that we will be the first to pull the trigger. And not only have we never done that before, to the best of my knowledge, I mean, maybe in some of the small wars, maybe, the Mexican-American War, I'm frankly not a student of it. I've read Abraham Lincoln's writings about how terrible a president he thought Polk was, because Polk did the Mexican-American War. And I'm sure that Polk, claimed he had some sort of justification, just like, remember the Maine was the justification for the Spanish-American War. That there was a boiler room explosion in the USS Maine down in the harbor in Havana Harbor in Cuba, and Frederick Remington was down there, and who was the family Hearst, William Randolph Hearst, was publishing his newspaper all across the United States, and he wanted to have a war, and he basically said to Frederick Remington, "Get me the pictures, and I'll deliver the war." And he did. So we had a rationale. We had a rationale, the Gulf of Tonkin for Vietnam. In every case, even when we weren't attacked, like in Vietnam, we at least pretended we were. And frankly, a large number of people within the United States and within the U.S. foreign policy establishment believed that we had been attacked. The Gulf of Tonkin was a very, very well done lie. But Donald Trump is not talking about that. He's not talking about reacting to an attack, whether it's real or simply perceived. He's talking about reacting to a threat. Now, it's a very different thing when you're on the schoolyard and the bully comes by and says, "I'm going to get you," versus when the bully comes by and says, "Give me your lunch money," and you refuse to do it, and he socks you in the mouth and pulls the money out of your pocket. Right? One is a threat, the other is an attack. There's a pretty broad consensus, whether it's the schoolyard bully or whether it's, North Korea, that if we are attacked, we should fight back. But what if we're simply threatened? Is that the appropriate space for nuclear weapons? And if we establish that as the new principle, as the new line for nuclear weapons, keep in mind, we're not the only country in the world that has nuclear weapons. If we establish that if any country threatens us, we will nuke them, what message does that give to India and Pakistan, who have nuclear weapons pointed at each other and on several occasions in the last couple of decades have nearly come to nuclear war, or at least nearly come to war? Their border conflicts are famous. So far, both India and Pakistan have been practicing what we've been preaching, which is you only use nuclear weapons if you are attacked with a nuclear weapon. Now, we have not put first strike into our law. There is an attempt to do that right now. But it's not the law of the United States. The law of the United States is that it's up to the president. And I personally think we should seriously consider changing that law, and that we should say first strike is not something that the United States will ever do with nuclear weapons, and literally make it a law. We have such overwhelming nuclear capacity that even if somebody got, even if North Korea fired a nuclear weapon at us and even took out a city, God forbid, we could still just wipe them off the face of the earth, which should be enough deterrence to prevent them from ever attacking us. But the minute that we say that if you're a member of the nuclear club, first strike in response to threat, first strike as deterrence is acceptable, we have completely changed the game. We have completely changed the rules of the game of being a nuclear power. A set of rules, by the way, that have kept the world from exploding any nuclear bombs in the context of hostilities since 1944. I mean, it's been a long, long time. Do we really want to change these rules? Do we really want to say that, hey, it's okay to vaporize 1 million people because somebody's words offended or frightened you? Small-fingered vulgarian? Do we really want to do it? I say no. Now, there is, the point that Strauss and Howe pointed out in The Fourth Turning. Every war uses the technology that was developed in the last. That's a bad thing.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
They basically predicted if we have another war, it will be nuclear. God forbid. We'll be back with your calls right away. And welcome back. I'm going to have to read this after I get off. Let's see here. Asphalt Bob in East Lake, Colorado. Hey, Bob. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
How you doing, Tom?
Good. On your mind.
I've been listening to all this stuff on these wars we keep getting ourselves in, and we're still in this mess over in the Middle East that nobody can prove anything.
Right.
And
we're in several messes in the Middle East, actually.
oh yeah, we're still in them, and our children's paying the prices.
Yep.
We have a mindset somehow in this country all of a sudden from our elders that that they'll be in the grave from old age by then, and let our children deal with it. Well, that's pretty kind of stupid when you say you love your children.
Yep.
That don't even make no sense, really.
Yep.
And on the second part of this is, in the kings of old over in England and Scotland and all that stuff in Ireland, the kings would be buddies, and they'd get the peasants to be at each other's throats so they could re-divvy up the land.
Yep.
And all the resources.
Yeah, that was the point I was making earlier about when we lived in Germany. There was a castle every 10 miles or so, and the guys who owned the castles, the local lords, they would maintain low-level conflict with each other so that the people would build the castle bigger and bigger so that when the guys from the other castle came to invade, everybody could run inside this castle. And, of course, it just worked to the benefit of the guys who owned the castles.
Well, they didn't have nuclear bombs back then either.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, but the worst they had was catapults.
Public's going to pay the price. We already are with our water being contaminated with all this lead and stuff out of Michigan and other places.
Yeah.
And nobody's even asking where that water's leaving once it leaves that state.
Yeah.
Let alone the fallout from what we're fixing to engage in. It's going to screw our water up. I mean, it's almost to a point now in some of these states, especially around Oklahoma and Texas and everything, you can't even drink it.
Yeah.
I mean, they're posting them where even if you go in there swimming, don't go in there with open wounds or you could die.
Yeah.
Lake Texoma,
yeah.
Dallas, I mean, it's popping up all over.
Yep.
And nobody's doing anything. And there's a lady.
Well, no, actually, Bob, somebody is doing something. Scott Pruitt is rolling back the rules to prevent that.
Well, how is that when they all work for the same corporations and they all own stock in these weapons manufacturers, Democrats and Republicans, and under the dictionary, Western Dictionary, fascism is the corporate-owned government.
Yeah. One of the things you'll discover if you dig into it, Bob, is that a lot of Democrats are not in that camp, in that category that you're describing, and a few Republicans, actually. are not. So it's, you know, set aside the cynicism. I would encourage you to try and get inside either the Democratic or Republican Party, whichever one you're more inclined for, and change it from within.
Neither. You can't. This is a no-win situation. This is going to go through.
So what are you going to do? Just walk away and let the world go to hell in a handbasket?
No, the only thing you could possibly do, and this will never happen probably, you know, people talk about slavery still here and everything. Well, let's go ask the Indians out here on the internment camps we got right here in our backyard. They're still slaved.
What does that have to do with your ability to change American politics?
You can't get the public to go with this because they start brainwashing your children in the schools with petroleum Pete. You've got the military doing AF tests in the other schools to get this military mindset. That's what they used to call the youth program over in Hitler days.
Yeah.
I mean, how, Tom? I mean,
well, those are serious challenges, Bob, but I just don't think that walking away from it and saying, hey, you know, they're more powerful than me, I can't do anything about it. I'm not willing to go there. I'm not willing to be that powerless. Bob, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up. I'm going down with a fight. We'll be back.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Nora in Seattle. Hey, Nora, what's on your mind today? Nora?
Hello. Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Hey, it's quite all right. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to let you know my Congresswoman, Pramila Jayapal, has joined with Senator Edward Markey and Ted Lieu to introduce H.R. 669, which is a bill to require the president to go to Congress for authorization of any nuclear first strike.
Great. H.R. 669.
It was introduced in January. It was sort of publicized in May, and all I know from Congress.gov is that it's still in the introduced and referred to the House Committee on Foreign Affairs.
Right. And Paul Ryan runs the House of Representatives sort of like a king. He has absolute power over what comes to the floor. He can block any piece of legislation. Ed Markey and Pramila Jayapal are both Democrats. Are there any Republicans on this bill?
Ted Lieu is also a Democrat from California.
That's correct.
So I don't know.
Yeah, because, without Republicans on the bill, it ain't going to go anywhere. But I think
I do encourage people to call their congresspeople and bring attention to this bill, especially now with all the publicity and about what Trump said yesterday.
Agreed. I was just going to say that now might be a good time to call 202-224-3121, which gets you the congressional switchboard. You can ask for your member of the House of Representatives, which is where I would focus this to initially. And, more than half of us have, well, actually fewer than half of us have Republicans as representatives, but more than half of the congressional districts have Republicans as representatives. And let your Republican representatives know that you support House Resolution 669 to limit the ability of the president to do a first strike, nuclear strike. And keep in mind, a first strike is different from a defensive response. It's a very, very different thing. Nora, thanks for the call. Thanks for the heads up on that. And maybe we can get Pramila Jayapal or somebody else on about it. Stephen in Beverly, New Jersey. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind?
Tom,
I was so happy to hear that a congressman finally grew a spine and submitted a bill to limit the power of the president for first use of nuclear weapons.
Amen.
Okay? But should definitely appear before a joint session of Congress for a declaration of war, but still retain sole authority in response to a missile attack on the U.S. or its territories.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all I needed to
Okay. Well, you said it very well, Stephen, and I can't disagree with it. Thank you very much for the call. Holly in Marshall, Missouri. Hey, Holly, what's up?
Oh, I just wanted to remind everybody that Korea has always been threatened by regime change ever since I can remember, and I'm in my 70s. And the saber rattling and military march almost every week has been to stay away from us, stay away from us. And here we have a president who's also terrified of regime change. And we knew that he would do anything. We expected a smaller war to distract from all of his crimes.
Right.
But
this is what Reagan did with Grenada. You know, as Iran-Contra was starting to break. Oh, hey, let's invade a little country.
And Bush did it when the poll numbers go down and the face starts disappearing and they start a little war. And then, most of all, so I always expected something, but I don't understand where General Kelly is, because he's got to be with him 24/7, it looks like.
Well, this is, yesterday I made a joke about, at 5:30 in the morning, General Kelly banging on the door at Donald Trump's bedroom going, I know you're in there with your phone. I know you're in there. And I just, the last job on earth that I would want would be Donald Trump's chief of staff, I got to tell you. Holly, thank you for the call. It's a great contribution to the conversation. Thank you. Wendell in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Wendell, what's up?
Well, I'm thinking about the paper ballot. I mean, it wouldn't take much to change that everybody would use a provisional ballot, and that's what I would suggest.
Or use the paper that we call provisional ballots, but provisional ballots don't get counted. So
everybody.
Right. Yeah, I think
they all get counted then anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm with Bernie on this. The United States needs to go back to a paper ballot system. It's crazy that and we need to make our computer systems more secure. And whether that means going to some kind of blockchain technology or what, I don't. I'm not the guy who's the expert on that. But such people are out there, and right now we have a voting system that is easily hacked. And has been, in my opinion, repeatedly hacked in my opinion, by Republican operatives. And the evidence of that is that every single time voting machines turn out a result that is profoundly different from the exit polls, which is a sign that the voting machines have been hacked. We use this to label elections in other countries as illegitimate, as we did in Ukraine back years ago. Every time you see that, the shift is in favor of the Republicans. And that tells me that they've been hacking voting machines for years and years. If some other country is doing it, if Russia's doing it, if China's doing it, if anybody else is hacking our voting machines, all the worse. But it is time for us to get a voting system that is simple, straightforward, easily audited, and totally transparent, and doesn't have big corporations involved in it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
How do we handle a man-child, a stubby-fingered vulgarian in the White House with nuclear weapons? And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the book Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class and What We Can Do About It, a book I wrote in 2006, but is frankly more relevant today than it was back then. Reading from page 11. There's a battle waging today in America that will decide the future of the middle class. On the one side are those like Jefferson who believe that if free people can govern themselves and have the right to organize their government to create a strong middle class, which will in turn keep the government democratic, small d.
On the other side are those like Thomas Hobbes, who believe that only a small elite can and should govern, and that the people should be willing to pay the price of poverty in exchange for security. Those who don't want democracy understand that a middle class will always work to create democracy, which is why they are so opposed to middle class creating government policies like free public education, limits to the concentration of ownership in the media, and social safety nets like universal health care and Social Security. They understand that such policies have and always will bring about a strong and vibrant middle class, which will, in turn, both demand and create a more democratic society, again, small d. Who are these people who want to undermine the middle class? They often call themselves conservatives, but those people are not true conservatives. They don't want to conserve or protect the America the founders gave us. I call them cons because they're conning America. My dad was a staunch Republican all his life, but he didn't believe that a small elite should rule America. He was glad the government provided safety nets like Social Security and Medicare and made unionization possible. My dad and most of the other real conservatives I have known believed in the middle class and believed in democracy. The battle we face in America today is not between liberal and conservative, nor is it between big D Democrat and Republican. The battle we face today is between those who want to protect our democratic heritage, small d, and the cons who want to create an America that benefits only a small elite organized around corporate power and inherited wealth. There are two types of cons who have worked together to screw the middle class. I call them the predator cons and the true believer cons. Predator cons are simply greedy. They use politics and/or philosophy as a cover for their theft of our common resources and as a rationalization for their growing wealth in the face of growing societal poverty and inequality. They're not conservatives in any true sense. They are not interested in conserving American values or even in keeping American wealth in America. They're the ones who ship jobs overseas, lobby for tax breaks from Congress, fight against the inheritance tax, and reincorporate their companies offshore to avoid paying U.S. corporate taxes. The predator cons' rationalization for their obscene pileup of wealth is that they're simply playing the game by the existing rules. And that's true to a large extent, except that they're also the ones who bought and paid for the politicians who set up the rules for them. They've conned America into believing that they care about the American economy when all they care about is making money for themselves. A great example of a predatory con is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. These agreements lower wages for American workers. They do not create well-paying jobs in America. They create record trade deficits. Cons don't even try to argue that free trade agreements are good for America anymore. Arguments like these, such as the Central American Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, are passed now by a single vote in the Senate in 2005, only because corporate America needs them to reap tremendous profits from the low wages they extract in non-unionized, non-democratic, and socially disorganized countries. Predator cons succeed in passing these agreements by threatening to withhold campaign funds from anyone who dares to oppose them. It's an old game that the robber barons of the 19th century knew well how to play. The second type of con is perhaps even more dangerous than the predators. They're the true believers. Just as true believers in communism brought about the death of tens of millions in Russia from the time of the Bolshevik Revolution until the fall of the Berlin Wall, so too the true believers in laissez-faire capitalism believe that if only government would go away, everything would be just fine. Employers would become benevolent, employees would become enthusiastic, and bureaucratic inefficiencies would just vanish. These so-called free marketers aren't bothered by the consolidation of companies or the loss of competition that happens when markets are unregulated. Like Thomas Hobbes, the true believers assume that society will run best when run by the small elite that ended up on the top. They believe in corporatocracy, the view that an economic aristocracy benefits the working class because wealth will trickle down from above to below. Ronald Reagan was a true believer. He didn't understand economics, and the simple notions of self-sufficiency and a pioneering spirit appealed to him. He asked, in essence, why would somebody want to regulate a business? Wouldn't it eventually always do what is best without regulation? What Reagan and his followers failed to understand was that business will not always do what's best for society. In fact, the fundamental goal of business, to maximize assets and profits while externalizing costs and liabilities, is often destructive to the public good. This becomes particularly obvious when business owners do not live or otherwise participate in the same society and culture as their customers. A small business owner can't run sewage out his door or pay his workers below a living wage because he has to face his next-door neighbor and his next-door neighbor's kid who may want to work in his shop. Same is not true, however, for multinational corporations. Executives of large corporations don't live in the same society as the people who work for them or who live next door to their factories. As a result, the legacy of unregulated big business and the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few, that legacy is pollution, worker exploitation, cuts to workers' safety, and the bestowing of profits to the company's elite while cutting benefits to the company's rank and file. This is the book Screwed.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Steve Wimberly. Steve is the director and producer of a new movie called Atticus versus the Architect, the political assassination of Governor Don Siegelman. The website is atticusvthearchitect.com. And Steve, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And I understand Don Siegelman himself is going to be with us later on in the week. Tell us about the movie.
Well, it talks about, really, it reveals a very dark underbelly of politics in Alabama, where Karl Rove and a lot of his Confederates rigged the jury system to throw Don Siegelman in jail, and under false pretenses. They were trumped-up charges. Matter of fact, they've never been considered criminal charges in the history of American jurisprudence. And as a result of such gross malfeasance, 113 former state's attorneys general have come together to protest the deliberate injustice against Governor Siegelman. It really is a horrendous miscarriage of justice. It's a story that has to be told, and I think people will be shocked. Not only do we tell the story of what happened to Don Siegelman, but we uncovered an enormous amount of corruption in Alabama, and we reveal it in the movie. And I think people are going to be stunned when they find out what really happened.
Is the corruption unique to one political party, or is it endemic systemically?
Well, believe it or not, it involves both parties, but mostly Republicans in Alabama. You'll have to, once you see the movie, it will explain a little bit that there were Democrats involved. There are a lot of money involved. And it was people are going to be shocked. This goes to the halls of power in Washington, D.C., right, of why that they wanted to get Don Siegelman out of the way, because they couldn't beat him in the polls. So they had to think of a way to get rid of him in another way. And that was through rigging the jury system, the justice system. They had a jury was rigged. The prosecutors were very politically biased against him. Even, they worked for Siegelman's political opponents. And, of course, there was a judge who was completely biased. So the three checks and balances of the judicial system were all rigged against him. It was impossible for Siegelman to win.
How is it that, Don was in jail for years. He just got out. How is it that the appeal process failed here?
Well, even the Supreme Court is political. And that does, it doesn't discount the appeals court either. They're very political as well. And he made two appeals. The first appeal was against three Republican judges appointed by Republicans, and the last one was two of the three judge panels were Republican, and one of them is strongly and devoutly Republican. Not to mention the very first person that really helped. Who helped rig an election against Governor Siegelman, Bill Pryor, sits on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, where Governor Siegelman's appeals had been heard. Now, of course, he recused himself, or he wasn't a part of those juries because, a very obvious conflicts of interest. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have couldn't sway opinions one way or another.
Sure, when you work with people every day, when you eat lunch with people every day, you tend to have some influence over them. My recollection is that this really started with the election of 2002 when Bob Riley lost the election. Don Siegelman went to bed believing that he had been reelected governor of Alabama. And when he woke up in the morning, he discovered that in one
congressional district, one Republican operative with one computer tabulating system had suddenly discovered something like 15,000 votes or voters who had voted for Democrats down ticket, but originally their vote at the top of the ticket, the governor's office, had been selected for Siegelman, but in fact, actually all those people voted for the Republican Bob Riley, and then down ticket they voted for nothing but Democrats. Am I remembering that correctly? And then Siegelman started yelling about that. At that point, they really started to come down on him like a 10-ton hammer.
Yes, that's exactly right. Matter of fact, the first scene in the movie covers that. It all happened in down around Mobile, in an area called Baldwin County. The votes came in. They were all tabulated, and the official call was made by AP and CNN. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, they said something went wrong. And what happened was there were about 8,000 votes just disappeared from Governor Siegelman's column. They just flat out disappeared. And it turned out that Riley's former chief of staff, or chief of staff at the time, Dan Gans, was at that location with a computer, and he was trained by the voting technology company that provided the voting machines. So
he basically, so the allegation is that Bob Riley's former chief of staff basically just edited the election to make Riley win. And I remember when Siegelman started doing local radio around this, there wasn't a single progressive station on the air in Alabama. They're all right-wing hate radio, and they all started screaming, kind of in concert, "He's a sore loser." Right?
Right. That's so typical too. And the media in Alabama is strongly weighted toward conservative.
Right. So how do you get from having an election stolen from you in a fairly obvious fashion? I mean, even for Alabama, this was pretty embarrassing. How do you get from that to being locked in solitary confinement?
That's a great question. But it took a lot of people and a lot of money and a lot of time to do it, and it took it took several years, an estimated $50 million of federal and state money to do this, to actually
destroy Don Siegelman,
so that he couldn't run against them. Yeah, that's what we estimate is they spent about $50 million in his investigations and prosecutions.
What was Karl Rove's role in all? We're talking with Steve Wimberly. He's the director and producer of Atticus versus the Architect, a new movie, The Political Assassination of Governor Don Siegelman. The website is atticusvthearchitect.com, and you can easily plug it into a search engine too. And also, Steve, don't let me forget to ask you where people can see this and where it's playing. And I realize that you've had at least one theater refuse to play it in Alabama. But my first question first, if you can.
As far as, how it all happened was, I guess...
Karl Rove's role.
I'm sorry?
What was Karl Rove's role in all this?
Karl Rove, being, of course, the architect, his role was he devised the whole plan. All the roads lead back to Karl Rove. Every connection, every person that had something to do with this had a connection to Karl Rove. It really became clear when a whistleblower came forward named Jill Simpson, who had worked with Karl Rove on doing opposition research against Siegelman. And she was brave enough to come forward and say, look, I know what happened. I was there. I was doing the opposition research against Don Siegelman, and they told me that I didn't need to work anymore, that that Karl Rove's partner, Bill Canary, said that his girls would take care of Siegelman. And it turns out his girls was his wife, Laura Canary,
who was a federal prosecutor,
and a second one named Alice Martin, who was a prosecutor in the Northern District of Alabama. Those were his girls, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Alice Martin, being a prosecutor, filed charges against Siegelman, but Siegelman won. It was thrown out before lunch of the first day. And the judge in the case said it was the most baseless case he had seen in his almost 30 years on the federal bench.
Wow.
Then, as soon as that happened, a soon as he was, when I say happened, I mean, as soon as he was acquitted, he announced not long after that he would run for governor again for re-election against Riley. Just a few days later, they filed charges against him again. I think it was 8 days later.
Amazing.
And that was for this second trial.
Right.
The prosecutor for this case was married to Siegelman's opponent's campaign manager.
Right.
Her name was Laura Canary, the federal prosecutor. She was married to Bill Canary, who was the campaign manager of Siegelman's opponent.
Bob Riley.
And Bill Canary also is the partner of Karl Rove. So there's a strong conflict of interest, and even a child could see, that this is a conflict of interest.
So Karl Rove basically took down a political opponent and didn't just take him down, threw him into prison and got him thrown into solitary for years. So, Steve, we're hitting the limits of our time here. The new movie is Atticus versus the Architect, the political assassination of Governor Don Siegelman. You are playing this throughout the South, it seems. Tell us where people can watch this movie, and if they don't happen to be in one of the towns where it's playing in a theater, how can they bring it to them, or what can they do?
Well, we're playing this Thursday, tomorrow morning at Netroots Nation, excuse me. And if anybody is planning on being there, the movie will play at 10:30 in one of the breakout rooms, and
Great.
we'd love to see you there. On Sunday, we're playing in Tuscaloosa at the Cobb Theaters at 3:00 in the afternoon on Sunday.
Okay.
And we would love to see you come out for matinee on Sunday. On the following Friday, we'll be playing at the Princess Theater in Decatur, Alabama. And please come out and see us.
But what about people who can't go to Alabama to watch a movie, or Netroots Nation for that matter? Are you offering DVDs? Is there rented on demand? Is it available through Amazon? I mean, the normal distribution routes for these kind of things?
Yes, it'll be on the normal distribution route very soon. It will. We're going to wait and play in theaters it'll be in theaters for the next month and a half.
I see.
And then, of course, it'll be DVDs, and it'll be on pay-per-view and distributed, the typical ways, Redbox, etc.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Steve Wimberly is the director and producer of Atticus versus the Architect, the political assassination of Governor Don Siegelman. The website Atticus, Atticus, V as in versus, the THE Architect, ARCHITECT. Atticus versus thearchitect.com is the website. Steve, great work. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Yep, good talking.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day, your calls, and, all that stuff right after this. And welcome back. Dean, watching Free Speech TV in Los Angeles. Hey, Dean, what's up?
Hey there. Well, I just had noticed earlier today that Trump's defense secretary has now actually doubled down on what Trump had said, basically warning Kim Jong-un to take seriously the threat of that there's consequences to moving any further.
Oh, but there's a very big and consequential difference, Dean, between what Mattis is saying and what Trump said. Trump said, if you keep threatening me, I will nuke you. Mattis is saying, if you take any aggressive action, we will nuke you. Big difference.
Yeah, well, he kind of said it in nicer terms, I guess, in more diplomatic terms. It still bothers me that he's got, and he's even got his evangelical counselor, what's it, Robert Jeffers?
Yeah.
Jeffers, who had also said God is giving him authority to take out Kim Jong-un.
I know, I saw that.
He's surrounded by a bunch of yes men who are really there to stroke his ego, and that disturbs me.
Yeah, this is the anti-gay right-wing pastor who's running Bible study classes for the cabinet that I guess Betsy DeVos is going to real regularly, and it is bizarre. It is beyond bizarre. Dean, thanks for the call. Well said. Leon in Maroa, Illinois. Am I saying that right, Leon? Watching Free Speech on Dish?
Yes, you are, Tom. Yes,
What's up?
you are, and thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
My topic falls in line with mental fitness for the job. I'm a retired union pipe fitter from Central Illinois, and at one point I worked in a nuclear plant that's in operation. And to get FBI clearance, we were fingerprinted and also had to take a 500-question test, which showed your ability, your mental fitness for duty.
Mm-hmm.
I think possibly all the candidates should have to pass this, and I think this president should be taken somewhere and given this exam immediately before we're all a pile of ashes.
So what's the process that you're recommending, Leon? Are you calling for the 25th Amendment to be invoked? Because that's going to have to come out of Trump's cabinet, which is extremely unlikely. Or
Well,
what?
In the future. I mean, if we...
Are you saying we need to set up legislation so that the next time we get a crazy person elected?
Yeah. I mean, all the candidates should have to be examined, and my wife feels that they should be groomed, serving politics or military.
Yeah.
To be a candidate, you know.
Well, we have that vetting process. It's called elections and primaries. And the idea is that the candidate gets in front of the American people enough times that they really get a good sense of who he is. The problem that we've had is the classic problem that every sucker who's been the victim of a con man has. All the poor people who signed up for Trump University and lost their savings, and, you know, all the people who invested in various Trump schemes that went bankrupt. And that problem is when you've got a salesman / sociopath, you can't tell what's true and what's not true, and you want to believe the guy. And I'm not sure we've ever had a sociopath at that level, a narcissistic sociopath, run for president before. I don't think our system is equipped to deal with this, and I'm not sure what to do about it. I mean, you know, impeachment is a clear remedy, and I'm guessing that it will be used sometime in the next year. But you know, we'll see. Leon, I share your concern. I just, you know, technically looking at, you know, what's the legal construct? How can it be done within the framework of the Constitution of the United States? It's a challenge. We'll be Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Bill in Sun City, Arizona. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
You're afraid of nuclear bombs?
Afraid is the wrong word. I'm frankly more afraid of a long, lingering, painful death from cancer than I am by being taken out by a nuke, right, which would be fast.
How long ago, Tom?
But you get the point.
How long ago was it that they told us to get under our desks? We're of the same age.
Oh, I remember well. It was 1956.
Right. and so I think that nuclear weapons are a scam perpetuated against the world. It's a control mechanism. I don't think we have half as many as we've paid for. I don't think they have half as many as they've paid for. I think it's just a control mechanism. Everybody's got them. Nobody ever lights them up in an offensive posture, and nobody ever will. It's just a terrible scam. We failed to listen to Dwight David Eisenhower, the last good Republican.
Yeah.
And the military-industrial complex realized they could scare us. Just like at 9/11, they showed us a cartoon of an airplane passing through a building like a hot knife through butter. The building was made out of 18-inch steel box beams and 18-inch concrete. They left out the third law of physics. They know they can fool us, Tom.
Yeah. Bill, I'm not quite that cynical. I believe that those weapons are actually out there.
I don't.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's a zero-sum game.
Absolutely. But there's people making a pile of money building those weapons. There's people making a pile of money deploying and maintaining those weapons. President Obama started the process, $1 trillion process of upgrading our entire nuclear arsenal, replacing everything with something new. The Russians are doing the same. There's money to be made here, and frankly, I think that this is a very, very concerning thing. But Bill, wouldn't it be great if you were right? I mean, if it was just all a bluff. I'm just very worried that it's not. Bill, thank you for the call. Marianne in Silverdale, Washington. Hey, Marianne, what's on your mind?
Hi, Bill. Well, I mean, hi, Tom. Thanks for this very important discussion. And I'd like to assure Bill that it's pretty real. I live right next to the nuclear submarine base, and I know there are things we can do. I'm a member of the Ground Zero Base for Nonviolent Action, and for over 40 years, we've had secular and religious people leafleting, getting information out about the cost, how immoral these costs are, and if we can risk nuclear war, why can't we risk disarmament? We have volunteers who have been blocking the gates at military bases. They risk arrest, and when they get arrested, we have a trial in which we can present evidence and get media and present the discussion. So I'm glad your callers spoke about supporting Senator Markey's bill. It's called Resisting First Use of Nuclear Weapons Act, and it's also got a hashtag, no red button. So there's plenty of organizations. Ours works in partnership with Physicians for Social Responsibility and Pax Christi, and many people are alarmed by this, in contrast to Bill. And I want to give a quote here from Martin Luther King Jr., who, just before he was shot, said, "When scientific power outruns spiritual power, we end up with guided missiles and misguided men." And we follow the works of Ground Zero, of Gandhi and Christ and many others in following a non-violent. We have training, and folks can go online. There's communities all over the country, and I think you pointed out too, was it 122 countries that recently signed the UN treaty saying, nuclear weapons are just incomprehensible, especially when we have two deranged people at the commands. Yeah. And so I encourage people to support Senator Markey and write your congressman. There are things we can do.
I am absolutely with you. Marianne, I want to get one more call in here before the end of the show, but spot on. And thanks for giving me the name of that, the Resisting First Use of Nukes Act, of Nuclear Weapons Act, H.R. 669. Wes in Taylor, Michigan. Hey, Wes, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you doing, sir?
Great. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Thank you for all you do. First of all, I am an independent, so I don't always agree with you, but I do appreciate all the information. First of all, these missiles, they have to be targeted. You don't just go press a button and then they magically find their target. They have to be programmed and stuff.
Right.
This takes time, and I gotta hope that the generals are not telling Trump this. Good old Forrest Trump, he's just floating around on a breeze.
Yeah.
So, they back in the Cold War, they were already targeted to specific targets in Russia. So you could go press a button, and within 5 minutes or whatever it was, they'd be off flying.
Right.
Now they have to be targeted. I don't know. Who knows whether.
Well, yes and no. If Kim Jong-un wants to throw a nuclear-tipped missile at the United States, and does not have the sophistication to come up with a really, accurate GPS-based targeting system where he can drop it right in the middle of Los Angeles or something like that. All he has to do is hit the continent to cause absolute panic and beyond panic, because there would be a nuclear cloud that would be going downwind and all kinds of things. It would be 9/11 times 100 if that were to happen. And that's all he needs to do. He doesn't need to actually have a high kill number. Wes, I'm far less sanguine about this than you are. Wes, but I understand what you're saying. But the North America is a hell of a big continent. Wes, thanks for the call. What an amazing day. What an amazing day. We will be back tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.